Hello, ladies and gentlemen. I'm Fronago, and this is Mesk.
Konnichiwa, Baka Gaijins!
What's up, bitches? So
Dumb bitches.
we're gonna be talking about the Discord store today, but before we get
I
there,
see you typing.
we have to see people buying games on other third-party services, which I think gives us a very perfect opportunity to talk about Steam and all the questionable things that Steam does, and then all the hilarious things that Uplay and Origin do, and there's probably some others that will come up as we jog our memories. But why don't we start with Steam first? Just because that's like the big one, and then we'll go into why like adding a fucking store to a chat client that's also running an operating system is a little silly. That sound good to you?
Yes, there is something I'd like to point out before we begin, is that that Terms of Service amendment that came out with Discord very recently is the main thing about it is they added a clause that says they can't be targeted by class action lawsuits. So apparently, it is actually legally binding to just put that in your end user license agreement to say that you can't be targeted by class action lawsuits. That apparently is legally binding.
Yeah,
It's kind of interesting they decide to add that now,
right.
after releasing the store.
Yeah, I think it speaks to some idea that, when they were, whatever executive or whatever set of executives are responsible for this sort of thing were probably very, like they wanted to get it out there, but you'd think that they would have had something like that to begin with, if like that legally binding clause that says we can't be targeted.
Well, it's pretty obvious whoever makes Discord is not very educated. They were probably advised by a lawyer or something to put that in there as soon as
Right,
possible.
yeah. I'm
Someone probably
surprised
looked it over when they did their store thing and was like, hey, you're going to get boned again because Discord's developers have already been boned in the past for data mining and selling people's data and stuff like that. So it's definitely something that'll probably repeat itself in the future. So
Has to your knowledge, has Steam ever been attacked in this way, or because they had the backing of an already established corporation like Valve, they were more insulated?
I haven't really followed Steam. I mean, I don't really follow the news of that stuff too much in general. There is something that tickles the back of my memory that they probably have been targeted. I know they have been targeted in like small scale stuff before, but it always doesn't happen. Especially since Valve has so much money that, much like Blizzard, they're basically infallible legally. So there's nothing really comparable to, for example, Blizzard's attempt to steal the copyright for Dota. That's like much bigger than any of the other things that have really targeted Valve that I can recall off the top of my head.
Well, actually, I have an article here that seems to be on the exact topic that you were talking about, where apparently in 2012, Valve updated Steam's user agreement to stop class action lawsuits. So I guess this is like it's standard industry practice dating back, 6 years now.
It's very bizarre that's actually legally binding. Although, from what I'm told, class action lawsuits are really not that ideal for individuals seeking recompense and more or less lines the pockets of lawyers, but it's still the legal systems are very strange. I'm not at all really educated in legalese beyond reading documentation for end user license agreements, but class action lawsuits are really actually very bizarre. In Canada, there is an attempt for copyright trolls to actually create a reverse class action lawsuit to bypass some limitations. And they're trying to copyright troll a very, very large number of people by adding them all in as plaintiffs or something like that. Like the whole everything about that is really weird.
Yeah, I don't think anybody I've ever met has been able to dispute the idea that legalese and just the way that laws are made is not like a really silly and ironically bloated fucking practically industry.
Like all you really need to do at the layman's level is just follow Apple. Apple
Right.
is like the absolute scum of the scum of the scum, to the point that apparently they've even tried to copyright app the name app, claiming that it was Apple, like identifiable with Apple as a brand name. And of course, there's the Apple versus Samsung and the copywriting of rounded corners and a bunch of other shit, which, as I showed you a week or two ago, was appealed and then upheld again, where people found that yes, you can actually
Copyright a shape.
legally patent very, very generic shapes. So it's absolute insanity.
Right, and that would be akin to like copywriting, a basic sentence, like a common phrase or something because it appears in your product placement. And nobody ever allows stuff like that, which is why the app thing most likely didn't, get through the first however many times that Apple tried to do it before they eventually gave up. I'm assuming anyways. Like I can't imagine them actually successfully pulling something like that off. But when they pull off something like the rounded corner fucking move, that does make you feel like maybe they could have swindled everything else the other way as well.
Yeah, there's definitely been hits and misses for Apple, and their hits are always incredibly scary, especially with the shapes thing. This is why there's copyright trolls and all this other shit, is because the whole system is just basically entirely, unregulated, and nobody who actually deals with lobbying or laws or anything like that knows anything about the business at all. So in Canada right now, we have a monopoly. There's a monopoly over the internet, the ISPs. And the monopoly, people would call it a duopoly, but since they're basically hand in hand, then you may as well consider them the same entity, which is Bell and Rogers. They have been pressing for like insanely aggressive power over censorship and funneling money into their pockets and stuff like that, making pretty significant headway, especially since the Liberal Party came into power. One of the things, for example, recently is they are capable of selling your information to American copyright trolls. So I believe I may have talked about this in the last or second last or some point, but it's really just one of those very bizarre things where this actually gets ruled as being legal, where they can actually just sell your information. I mean, that's basically what Facebook and Google does anyways, but usually you would expect that, a middleman that you are paying an extremely large sum of money for to deal with a public service is not going to just turn around and start selling over your information. But that's precisely what they do, and it's like at the government level, we don't care. Now, obviously, when you look at something like Steam or Discord, it's identical. The product is you. Discord and Steam are both selling your information, and there's really nothing you can do about it except opt out of the service. There's no consumer protection laws. There's really nothing you can do unless you live somewhere in like the EU. The EU has really had a history of attacking these things with sort of limited success, but there has been antitrust lawsuits and legislation ruled in favor of consumers in the EU as opposed to the US, where President Donald Trump has actually claimed that Google is a good company, and that's actually the most insane thing he's ever said. Like nothing else he's ever said has really been, out of the standard. But to try to defend Google is just insane. But then there was actually some clashing of heads between State and Google in regards to a variety of reasons, actually. For example, Google manipulating search results, or at least there's a recording of a meeting between individuals in which they were discussing manipulating search results. I don't think it comes as a surprise to anybody that they already manipulate search results and, of course, subsequently deny it. Because unless you have access to all their systems, you can't really prove otherwise. But I believe there was an investigation that may or may not be being launched in the near future in regards to that, amongst a variety of other things. But Steam is also a monopoly. It holds by far the largest everything except, I believe, the main competitor for Steam is actually Tencent. I was doing some reading earlier about Tencent, and they are very Microsoft or Google in a way in which they just start snapping things up and buying them all over the place. So I believe they actually own Riot as well, or at least they hold a very large amount
Yes,
of
they
their.
own a majority share I
Yeah.
believe it's not just a controlling share; it's like actually a majority share of the company. So they
So
are in charge of a lot of the purchasing decisions there, and they also are the ones who run all of the other esports in China. It's like it has to go through them if it's going to be a competitive game, I believe.
there was something that happened.
Oh,
Can't remember details.
they own Bluehole, which makes PUBG. That's the other one that they own.
Yeah. So uh, there was a variety of. There was something that happened in China where something was dropped out and they immediately snapped in with their own replacement. I can't remember if it was. I don't think it was Steam. It was something else. I read about it earlier today too. But so they're like the primary competitor. They're the ones you've really got to watch out for because China is obviously an incredibly different culture than anything you're really accustomed to. For example, there was that video I think maybe you linked a while ago in which was predicting like 20 years Canada's not even going to exist, just because of China buying it and India owning the rest of it. In which Chinese bought a large amount of real estate, and then the state for China actually seized it, so they own it. And I'm not really sure of the details of that, but China is a very interesting country in many different ways. They have some really noteworthy developers for games there, and then you have Tencent, who's a very, very scary business. Of course, you have Foxconn that creates the vast majority of Apple stuff, child labor, people throwing themselves off of buildings, barbed wire, all that good stuff that Apple doesn't tell you about.
Yeah, they
And
actually hang nets to catch people
yeah,
so that they
because
can
so
get
many
back to
people try to
work.
kill themselves in there.
Yeah.
And then, of course, you have the prisoners who are forced to mine gold in World of Warcraft, and
I can't believe
variety
that's a
of other
real
things.
thing.
Yeah, that is a real thing, and it's worth keeping an eye on Tencent in China because if anybody's going to be competing with platforms like Google and Steam and stuff, it's more than likely going to come from them. You do have a lot of these copycats trying to make their own launchers to get away from Steam because Steam imposes a tax or a levy, if you will, on sales on Steam. They take a cut of the revenue. So, of course, they don't make enough money. They don't print enough money selling the same regurgitated garbage they've been selling for 20 years. They want even more money. So you have Uplay and Origin, which thankfully I've never had the displeasure of having to use. I've heard many horror stories about them, and Steam is also very bad now. I used Steam for quite a few years, and it's gotten just unusable in the last couple of years. Ever since they added in the social networking shit, it's turned into an ungodly, bloated, heaping pile of shit. And within the last couple months, most of the time it doesn't do anything at all. Their update recently to make it more like Discord immediately disabled that as fast as possible. And I've pushed out information. If anybody listening is curious how you can disable the Steam updates for the friend thing and whatever else for your shortcut, you add in dash no chat UI and then dash no friends UI, and you'll be back to a little bit more sensible user interface. And then there's Discord, which could be a Tencent front to create a competitor. I mean, Tencent owns a majority share, I think, for Discord, or bought them outright or something like that. I was reading another article in regards to Discord, but it was an older article stating that even if a company like Google bought Discord, since Tencent owns a good chunk of their shares, it doesn't actually mean that that other company would own Discord or something. It's confusing.
Well, I've been looking up all these legal stories and stuff. The only thing I could find for a Discord sort of like violation of law. So there's one thing that they violated a open source library that they were basically stealing the code of, even though there's supposed to be a copyright notice that it was actually removed from the library that they downloaded it from. But other than that, which is hilarious, I guess the founder of the Discord company was also involved in Open Faint, which I'm not familiar with, but apparently has some lawsuits associated with it for installing stuff on people's phones without their consent.
Yeah.
So either way, I mean, it doesn't really have to be something overt at this point. The fact that you're putting in like protection so that it says outright you can't sue us is a little spooky, and especially if they're also going to go on to become a copycat Steam like you were talking about, because Discord doesn't make enough money from Nitro allegedly. It does seem like it's a play to try and make sure that their profits that they're going to hopefully see that in their mind from this store move are going to be protected, I guess, some sort of protection from some fuck up that could happen as early as day one of launching a new part of their service, I guess. But it is really spooky when you see all these things that Tencent owns. Like, I'm trying to find out some more information on that so I can rattle off conspiracy theories on stream instead of doing something productive with my time. But I'm not really not super well versed in like the economics of Tencent. All I know is the big ones are Riot Games and Bluehole. Of course, I'm sure they have their own sort of Steam client, like you were talking about, or some sort of equivalent. Because I know that Valve themselves has to go through a shell developer called Perfect World, if they want to get anything done in China, because it has to be Chinese, like a homegrown native game developer, if it's going to be released in China. And so that Valve has to actually release a game through another developer. I think that's also related to the fact that this video would actually be banned because my Discord profile picture is a skull, and they ban skulls in China. So I think that's probably related. Let's see. They have an 80% majority stake in Grinding Gear Games, which I recognize from I don't know where. They own Miniclip, which is a Flash site.
The name is familiar to me too, and that's usually a bad thing.
Yes, there were New Zealand. Oh, they made Path of Exile. That's where I know them from.
That's why.
And they own They fully own Riot, so it's 100% share, and an 84.3% share of Supercell, which I've never heard of before. And I misspoke earlier when I probably intimated that they fully own Bluehole. I guess they have a minority business stake, which is like 11% here. This is all public information I can find by Googling, Google is a scary word to say now, but searching something. They own Activision Blizzard in an undisclosed minority stake, so we don't know how much they own of Blizzard, but they do have a stake
Blizzard
there.
recently actually switched CEOs as well.
Right.
I think it's a World of Warcraft producer that is CEO now.
Yeah.
I mean, it doesn't really change anything, but
40% of Epic Games, which oh, that's right, because the big joke was that Bluehole was suing Epic Games because of the whole Fortnite thing. Like they were trying to claim that Fortnite copied
yes.
PUBG. I think I told
Didn't
this
they
on
also
the podcast
try to claim? They tried to claim that the frying pan was an iconic weapon or something equally insane.
I don't know. That's pretty spooky.
Yeah, Tencent is in everywhere. It's not just games. Their platform is WeGame. They also have an online bank.
Okay, so they have WeChat as well, which seems to be like their social network.
Yeah. This is quite a bit.
This is spooky to read, honestly. This is like, let's see. They have WeChat, which is a social network. They have a search engine. That's not good. You can't have a search engine.
They're in everything. They're in film production too, and music, and just like general internet stuff.
Yeah. They also run a digital payment system. And they are on motion pictures. Jesus Christ. There's Tencent Pictures and Tencent Penguin Pictures. What the fuck?
Number of employees is nearly 45,000. So it's definitely worth keeping an eye on them, because China in general is looking more and more and more into getting into the Western markets, because there's really very little competition for them. Steam is alive and well, and Valve is pretty well situated, but but it really wouldn't take that much to knock them out of there. All of the attempts thus far from Ubisoft and Blizzard and so on and so forth, their platforms are all garbage. They're all unusably garbage. Like Steam is bad, but theirs is even worse.
Oh yeah,
The
for
Blizzard
sure.
launcher is horrible. It's actually like the worst piece of software I've ever seen. It's just unbelievably slow and dysfunctional. Like you couldn't ever imagine using that for a general service. It's bad enough just to run something in it. And that's the competitors that these companies are making instead of using Steam and taking advantage of Steam's larger exposure. So, someone actually came along and managed to convince enough people to publish to it, which is really easy. Then it's the same situation with YouTube. YouTube currently has dominance because the competitors are really not that good right now. There's Nico Nico, there's Dailymotion, there's VidMe or something like that, and they're all pretty limited in many ways, and have like really weird arbitrary restrictions on them. So it's like hard to convince advertisers to go there, and therefore hard to convince the major content developers to use it. And of course, the vast majority of people don't understand the issues with YouTube. As long as it works on their iWatch, they're pretty content. So Steam is very similar, but I think more and more people are starting to realize how garbage Steam actually is, especially since the addition of all this absolutely useless social networking shit that has really, really slowed down the system quite a lot.
I can't understand the motivation for adding that in at this stage, anyways, because like, at what point do you even think you have an opening to get into that market if you're gonna be doing social networking? Like, people already use Twitter and fucking Facebook, and like, nobody's gonna bail off of Facebook until somebody makes a dedicated replacement to Facebook. So, like, nobody's gonna use, like, if Discord added like a Snapchat story feature or something, I don't think very many people would use that. And that's like, Discord's marketed as a social app. So like, I don't understand why Steam, of all places, of all programs, of all services, are trying to crowbar their way in.
I have no idea. I think Valve just thinks, oh, we already have a market, so let's just throw in random things and see if it sticks. And I don't know anybody who has approved of their changes. And it just adds even more load onto an already beleaguered network.
Right.
So, and a very, 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 very bloated client that is regarded as, it's actually very unsafe because it uses Chrome. And Chrome is not secure, and people will get rooted or rootkitted or destroyed, just obliterated out of the in application browser because Chrome is very insecure. And that's a massive security threat in itself. Of course, you've got like a billion fucking Steam web helpers. That's all the various Chromium, I think it's Chromium
Yes, Chromium.
pieces that are running and just devouring resources like crazy. Steam will actually cause me significant performance loss. Just having the main window open. If I close that, it usually fixes things. It rarely ever loads the pages for anything. Usually, you can't even access activity or a profile. Just will hang indefinitely. Sometimes accessing store pages is difficult. So on and so forth. It's an absolute mess. And then rather than like tidy things up, make it fast and efficient, they've gotten caught up in the whole modern web design of make it bigger and push advertisement as much as possible. So you may have noticed, but over time they've been gradually trying to force more and more advertising into the store. I think they realize that most people just look at the current top sellers or upcoming releases. So there's been like a gabillion fucking banners and stuff placed between those points. And it gets to the point where I'd rather just use the web page and use uBlock and just block everything if I'm going to actually look at that. Not that I ever purchased anything on Steam, but at least not anymore. The more interesting thing about Steam is production applications started publishing on there as well. For example, Substance Designer, Mindtex, I believe Sony Vegas can be purchased on there. Of course, some of the more obvious ones like RPG Maker.
Yeah, that
So
is really weird.
it seemed like, well, it's really smart because I think the most of these developers realize that their software is very heavily pirated because it's obscenely expensive. It is prohibitively expensive. And a lot of these developers don't actually care about that. Like, I'm sure if they had an absolute ironclad case in front of them, they would pursue it legally. But I don't know. I've never even heard of Autodesk pursuing copyright trolling, because the thing is if somebody pirates 3ds Max or Maya and then learns how to use it for whatever reason, and then they enter a business, now they're basically legally required to actually own the software license, which is very expensive. But since they've already established the fact that they've worked with this program for however long and are actually going to use it, it's actually like market security. So what ends up happening is the developer ends up turning a blind eye, because ultimately it usually ends up serving them anyways. So it's kind of very strange. But Steam saw a lot of these push their applications into it with different pricing platforms. So I believe we talked about subscription platforms at some point and their absurdity. That's
Yes.
really, really bad. But there was a couple that were pretty promising, like Substance Designer, for example. Chances are, if you're doing modding or making a game or something today, and you are dealing with any kind of assets, any kind of graphical assets, you've got Substance Designer in your toolkit. You're using that to make your materials and your textures and everything like that. Only an extremely absolute few minority would not use it. It's the most powerful feature complete program in existence. As integration for all the major engines. It's pretty much a no-brainer. And their payment model has changed all throughout time, but on Steam has its own like edition of the game, where it's an initial payment, and it actually I want to check to see if it's still there. And it costs about $150, which is very, very expensive. It's very, 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 very prohibitively expensive for an independent, like an actual independent developer, not a fucking memester indie developer. Tee hee, I got $90,000 on fucking Scamscar. I'm gonna go buy some cocaine and hookers. I mean, like an actual independent developer, $150 is a huge fucking investment for one thing.
Yeah, you
But
won't really see that too often, I don't think, coming out, unless again, unless it's like a what you're saying it is, which is a very well put together sort of feature complete production. I guess the issue would be that people would probably pirate it initially and then buy it, like you were saying about market security and all that, once they enter into a real company.
so that when you talk about stuff like online stores and stuff, market security is really a big thing. Valve could do literally fucking anything to Steam, and nobody would really bat an eye. And
Yeah.
they've been doing insane things on Steam for a while.
Well, yeah,
But
it's exactly like YouTube, where you were talking about, nobody has liked the changes to Steam's user interface, but nobody I've never met has enjoyed the changes they made to YouTube's user interface, but they keep using YouTube. So, of course, they're still going to have the same problems, because they could make it, like, they would have to do so much shit to that service to make it even more unusable and stupid than it is right now if they wanted to drive people away. And I feel like the same level of market dominance, at least in the West, has been established by Steam as has been by Google with YouTube.
Steam owes a lot to its age, and the fact that Valve was at one point a company that people had some degree of respect for. So Steam was launched alongside their platforms, and it just kind of integrated stuff that came along, more or less of a matter of convenience, but also because there was not really many alternatives. GameSpy comes to mind, and again, it's just like Uplayer Origin. Nobody will use that if they can avoid it. And
Right.
that was basically it. The real competitor in the U.S., as far as I understand it, is GOG, Good Old Games, that steals scene releases for DRM removal. And
I
then
just can't
sells
understand
that.
that particular one, because I've had so many problems with trying to get GOG releases to work without destroying the product that I'm playing. Like, for example, I've been playing the Warlords Battlecry game, and I linked you like a cutscene, which was hilarious from them some time ago. Now, that game is apparently really fucked up on its GOG release, and a lot of the issues that I was seeing may have been related to the fact that GOG was the one who sort of repackaged it, because of course the whole hallmark of that game is that, or that service rather, is that you can play these really old games that you remember from your childhood, or you were recommended by other people that you grew up with, or whatever, and you can play it on modern operating systems. And there's even like troubleshooting guides and stuff. Like, it's a lot easier to set up than having to try and download and run like virtual machines or whatever. So for the layman who doesn't have a lot of time on their hands to do all the setup and isn't super technically minded, maybe GOG is like a good, sort of middleman in that respect. The problem with it, though, is that I think that is a result of either incompetence or just a necessity of changing the game so much so that you can release it fully while still maintaining compatibility. Is some emulation stuff that they do really fucks with the end product. So in Battlecry 1, and maybe more prevalent in the second and third games, which thankfully I have a non-GOG version of, the game will just flicker and your cursor will disappear, units will disappear, and sometimes terrain will just go black. So like there's some seriously fucked up rendering issues that could potentially be game breaking depending on what game speed you're playing at or whatever. And certainly will be very adversely transformative, we can say. And so with GOG, I don't think that enough people hold them to, take them to task over this. Based on at least my experience, every single game that I've downloaded has some serious issues. And I know some people have had better experiences with them, but I don't know anybody who hasn't ever run into some serious fucking issues with their ports, because that's what they are. They're ports. And people just think that there's some weird wizardry at work, but the technical side of it is that they're porting or emulating or doing something like that, and it's leading to some really fucked up releases. And that's probably one of the reasons why they're held back compared to something like Steam, which, even with Steam, you have a lot of problems, but at least it localizes a lot of the INI files and stuff into one folder that you can go and look at. So there's some element of troubleshooting that's available to you. Plus, it's a bigger company. It can have like 24/7 tech support or whatever. And I don't know that GOG has that. Maybe they do now. So I guess there's a number of advantages, but that's like my main issue with GOG is that, at least with Steam, if a game doesn't work or something, I can get it refunded immediately. With GOG, I don't know what the fuck your recourse would be.
Yeah, I've never used GOG. I've never heard anything good about it, so I'm really, really reluctant to really try it.
That's
The only
another
other
thing that that's another thing that gets this developer who made GOG, CD Projekt Red, the guys who made Witcher. They're a Polish dev, and apparently they have a lot of clout in the industry for amongst consumers for making their flagship title, The Witcher, but also for their business practices. And I think a large part of that is because of like the optics of what GOG looks like on paper. In people think, oh, look at this, these guys are great, and they re-release these old games so that people can have at them, but it's not great, man. There's some seriously fucked up problems here.
Yeah, it's gonna take more than a no CD crack from 2001 to get some of those games to work.
Right.
So I just linked Substance Designer there. When this stuff started showing up on Steam, I thought it had a lot of potential. I mean, Steam as a platform may be pretty garbage, but it was kind of more hopeful that because the thing is that unless you walk into a game company and they set you up with all the software, getting a hold of this stuff can actually be really difficult. Some of these companies have deals with certain colleges, or maybe if you provide like a college ID, you can get what is called a student license, and that allows a cheaper access to the platform. I know that was a big deal for 3ds Max back in the day. But if you're self-taught like myself or so many other people, or you don't have access to those resources, or it's something more niche, or even if you do, unless you're already like being introduced to the software, just discovering it can actually be really difficult. So I only discovered Substance Designer and Substance Painter not even really that long ago, a couple of years ago, and it's been a pretty big thing for a while. And it does a myriad of really, 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 really useful things. So the material thing, I haven't really worked too much with it yet. I haven't really had an active project to work with it yet. But I do actually own this. This was something that was bankrolled to me. So it is definitely something I actually want to get into. But it's something like I only discovered by chance. So that's the case with a lot of stuff like that. A lot of people who do mods, for example, discovering this software and what it does and how it can help you, that's the first step to a problem. So from what I've seen, what I've understood is a lot of these programs are really like isolated, and there's not really like a lot of competition between them. Now, Substance Designer, I can't really speak to its load when it's like really like got a lot of stuff open, but right now, I've actually got it open, and it's using 35 megabytes of RAM. So this is Substance Designer, not Substance Painter. Audition is using 4 megs of RAM, and I've got Unreal 4 open. Let me just go find it here. That's using 1.6 gigabytes of RAM. So Unreal 4 has a huge project open. Now Discord, one of its processes is using 66, and then another process is using 800. So Discord, at this point in time, is using close to 900 megabytes of RAM. That is over 9 times, actually more like over 18 times more than Substance Designer, which has a far more complicated and like a large interface, a lot of user objects and a lot of GDI objects in it. And it's comparatively using almost as much as Unreal 4, which has a 60 gigabyte project open in it, and is open in a map with kite demo assets and my 4K textures that I've rendered out of Filter Forge, and a bunch of windows and other stuff open. And it's been open for quite a while as well. So Discord uses a lot. And Substance Designer, superficially speaking, it seems to be a pretty efficient program. Now, what I was hoping is that it would really pick up where a lot of these companies would go into Steam and start pushing their products, and then they would realize how absurdly expensive their shit actually is, and then they would try to make it more reasonably priced. Sadly, that's not the case. I think that $150 for Substance Designer, because that comes with Substance Painter and material to bitmap too as well, which I don't think is really worth that price. But Substance Designer, Substance Painter are probably worth that price if you know how to use them. If you don't, then it's not. But the vast majority of programs out there that you basically are required to possess for making like a StarCraft mod, take for example Photoshop 3ds Max. Those are like your essentials for making a good StarCraft mod. Those are unrealistically expensive to expect anybody to buy who's a hobbyist, and you can't really acquire them as a hobbyist otherwise. Like it's unless you dole out the dollars, you're going to be going the way of Davy Jones. And while these developers expect you to do this, it's always one of those things where if you could prefer to not have to pirate it, it would be better. The only reason you have to pirate it is because a lot of the cases you basically were stuck paying hundreds to thousands of dollars to invest into something you're never going to actually make any money off of, and chances are you'll never be good enough at to make money off of. For example, I've used 3ds Max since 2001, and I've been paid for 3ds Max work, but I can tell you it's not commercial viable work. People only pay me because they're stupid, and because StarCraft 2 has no one in it who can do 3D stuff. So that's why I was paid, because I had skills in an area where there was literally no one else who did. And that's not good, and that's like a niche thing, and you're certainly going to be looking into that when you're getting into StarCraft or anything else. Is maybe you have dreams of making money off of it, but right now you're probably making a mod you probably don't have $800, $2,000, $3,000 to just throw at something that you probably don't even understand how to use to begin with. So most people don't do it, and by using Steam as a central publisher, that would set these up for competition, but there isn't too many of them that are using it. And the exposure, I don't know hard numbers, but it doesn't really seem to be that big right now. Steam is kind of like an aside for Substance. They have their own subscription-based platform elsewhere. It seems like Steam just still gives you the upfront price, which probably covers a range of updates, and then this subscription could be on the side. It's kind of weird what they've been doing. But for example, I don't think you can get 3ds Max on here.
Well, no, I imagine not. That's like isn't Photoshop and 3ds Max like some of the most expensive programs like out there?
So 3ds Max isn't on here. I would highly doubt I doubt any Autodesk stuff is on here in general. So no. So chances are, if you're working with a game, you're using Autodesk software. You're using Maya or 3ds Max. In many cases, you're using both. Those are basically the only viable software for modeling whatsoever. Blender is a meme, and there's not really too much else except for like ZBrush and Mudbox and like sculpting software. There's some software you can use for renders or testing materials. I don't know too much about those, but I think with Substance Designer, they're highly unnecessary unless you're making very specific kinds of renders to publicate for your portfolio. Upon which case, there's I can't remember their names, but there's a couple softwares I've seen pushed out there. But the thing is chances are if you're making assets, you're using Autodesk stuff. You're familiar with Autodesk formats. You're using Autodesk stuff to get things into your game one way or another, and you're not dealing with anything like Blender, even if you know how to use it, because Blender actually has to reverse engineer the FBX format. So their support for that is an absolute fucking mess, and the program's a meme. So you have Steam, which has the biggest market for games. You know that this is like anybody who is in digital gaming more than likely is at least aware of Steam. I know a lot of people who will never use Steam. They will never install Steam because they don't believe in DRM. They don't like having things online only, and they know that they can just be yanked out from under them. But that's a niche. Most people are casuals. They don't care if their $2,000, $3,000 investment suddenly vanishes out from them tomorrow, so long as they have it today. So that's the biggest market for potential modders, people who may be actually interested in getting in the games industry, or sparking that interest. You know, a lot of people who just play games that could potentially become the next technical artist, the next, musician. So I think it makes sense to expose them to the availability of the software at a very affordable price, and have the resources enabled to teach them how to use it. So that's what I thought Steam was going towards, which was interesting to me because I have learning disabilities, and seeing a push more or less to online coaching and stuff like that, which is affordable because there is a lot of online coaching for this software. It's just also extremely expensive, and most of it's not very good either. Actually, I've gone through a lot of it, and that's not very good. But if you were looking at a big platform like Steam, catering to the average Joe, maybe I'd find something, right? So I kind of paid attention to that for a while, but it didn't really seem to pick up. Autodesk doesn't have any software on Steam at all. They have their own site and their own front end, but that's not exposing them to Steam. You'll guarantee the extreme vast majority of users on Steam don't know what Autodesk is. They've probably never heard of it before. That was different back in the day, at least as far as Europe and stuff was concerned, because there was a lot of CGI and custom models and fan models for stuff like Babylon 5. And you actually saw Shape. It was 3ds Max and another program, not Maya, that I remember being. I can't remember. Anyways, Steam had the potential to really like expand out of games and start encompassing digital software. The platform is there, but people didn't accept it. There's only a few really major players on Steam, and their prices are still expensive. For example, if I suggested to you to, try out Substance Designer for putting together models in 3ds Max for StarCraft, $150 is a huge fucking price tag to just jump into something. It's much easier to convince someone to try out Memtex or Mindtex. Because Mindtex will take diffuse maps and turn them into normal maps, and it's insanely powerful and insanely useful, and I would say indispensable for dealing with StarCraft 2, for example. And that's like $10. Comparative software starts at the price range of Substance Designer. That's one of the reasons why I discovered Substance Designer, is because Bitmap to Material basically does the same thing. There's also Ndo, which used to be a free Photoshop plugin. They started selling it for like $120. So it used to be something that looked really promising, and then it suddenly became inaccessible to the entire market that would actually use them. Because chances are, if you have $120 to spend on a Photoshop plugin, you're already good enough to make your own normal maps. So you're usually using it for convenience. You just denied everybody who actually wanted to use it for making mods, porting stuff like I was. So I think Steam had like a lot of potential to really expand its horizons do some yoga of the lower and look to push its market out to really accommodate custom content. Instead, Steam became incredibly toxic to custom content. You have the selling of mods and other insanity. I mean, it makes sense from a business standpoint, but all it does is just create circular toxicity and destroys creativity and innovation. And just look at Dota 2. Just look at Team Fortress 2. It's just this fucking shit show, this goddamn disaster. And then a lot of the developers for production software didn't accommodate it. Not really to Valve's detriment. It's more or less a detriment to the people who make that software, because I think they really could benefit from making them more user friendly. For one, I've used 3S Max for a long time, and I would never tell you it was user friendly in the slightest. But they didn't, and they stayed exorbitantly expensive and inaccessible for most people unless you want to pirate it. So most people just pirate it. It's just kind of like accepted. If you're a modder, chances are you own almost nothing you're using, which is silly. It's something that really comes to mind talking about shops like Discord and stuff, because Discord makes a shop and it doesn't have anything of interest on it at all. It's basically a bunch of shit that if people are interested in, they've already got. And you have to pay Nitro to have it? Like, who the fuck would ever give Discord money? It's a bloated chat client. They don't deserve any money. Nobody would use any money. You don't get any actual features out of it. It doesn't make a Discord more performance conscious. It doesn't stop messages from failing to send. It doesn't fix the god awful voice quality. It doesn't do anything.
What
I
it
still use
does is
Ventrilo.
lets you use emoji in other servers. So, if people are willing to pay $4.99 a month per streamer to rent digital PNGs on Twitch, then they are definitely willing to pay Discord an $8.99 monthly subscription fee so that they can rent their emoji in other servers.
And of course, Discord doesn't use this money to improve the product in any shape or fashion. It still stays slow. It still stays bloated. They still won't disclose what they're doing with it. I'm waiting for somebody. The reverse engineering Discord would be Herculean because of how fucking enormous all the useless lines of code is in it. But if somebody actually did reverse engineer and dumped out what it's actually doing, there would probably be a massive shit show. Because it is known, for example, that the game detection doesn't actually turn off when you turn it off. It just doesn't display it anymore. And that was responsible for all the disconnects and lag it was causing, because it was actually causing Windows services to just fill with errors and then cause the internet and performance to freak out. And it's something that's known for years and comes and goes, never acknowledged, but well documented. And in all likelihood, nobody in Discord even knows how to address something like that.
Well, they fixed it eventually, thanks to Nitro. Buy Nitro now to support Discord fixing its insane bugs that destroy Windows.
Good luck. Good luck getting them to fix anything. Now we have a bug. I don't know if this is happening to you. I noticed it was happening to a lot of people in Discord, where the client will report that the window has new messages when they're not new until you actually send a message, and then it will stop reporting them as new. Like that's an entirely new, bizarre bug to something that, as far as anybody could tell, has never been touched since the program came out. And now it's suddenly broken and it's suddenly misbehaving half the time. That's some Blizzard tier shit.
Wow, they might have hit Alt and then left-clicked somewhere, because you can mark messages as unread by doing that.
No, this happens to me too. It literally just fails to update the status of the window when you go to it.
Yeah, actually, that sounds familiar, because I feel like I've done that before by well, actually, I don't feel like I've done that before, but I've somehow pranked other people into having that happen. Like, I was messaging some people about a plugin change that I was trying to get working some time ago, and they they answered it on their while they were at work on their phone, and then I got a message from them later on that was like, if I send a message, will it finally say that I've read this message? Nope. Fuck. So it was pretty good.
Yeah.
The fix that you were just talking about didn't even work for them.
I don't know why people don't just stick to XMPP or IRC or something. The only reason I have Discord installed is because of the few people I play D&D with. Well, I don't know why they don't just use IRC or something. Vent can be hosted locally. I'm sure IRC could be set up the same way.
Because you gotta have a feeling of community. You gotta
There is
have
no community.
emoji.
It's a chat room.
Gotta have memes.
A chat room is anywhere. Like you have a chat room on fucking Facebook.
But can you have memes on Facebook? I don't think so. You gotta
I mean,
have
Facebook is a meme.
every
And you're a
time
meme for
that
using
this
Facebook. So
every time that this program loads and fails to connect because of some insane issue, then you better believe that I want a meme that says constructing additional pylons. Haha, because I play StarCraft 2.
wow, these guys are gamers. Wow, golly. It really connects with me on a personal level. I feel like I'm a part of the Discord team. I support these gamers by giving them my coffee money.
I just don't get it. At what point are we going to start charging people literal arms and legs? At what point is Ubisoft going to say, send us your DNA through blood transfusions, and that's how you can pay for our games? But only trials. You got to keep sending it until you're empty.
Well, I believe that Day 1 DLC pretty much fits in that. Because let's take, for example, the new Soul Calibur. That's kind of interesting. I played a lot of Soul Calibur back in the day. Oh, what's that? One of the characters is already locked out behind an extra fucking purchase. You want to know how expensive that game is? I didn't realize this is how insane games have gotten. Well, let's say I went to buy Soul Calibur 6. The base edition is $80 fucking dollars. That the only time I've seen games that expensive is back in the N64 days. Where games are like $60, $70. That was like a pinnacle I never thought we'd ever see again. And if you want the deluxe edition that actually has the stuff that's been intentionally locked out of the game, so to encourage you to pay more, that's $116. This is before tax. So if you wanted to buy it, you're actually paying like $90 for the base game without even a chunk of the content that was made for it. That's spooky, man. Like, this is Halloween. It's like the age of spook and shit. $90 for a digital game that I don't even own physically and I'm only buying a license for and don't actually technically own. That's spook. That's pretty goddamn spooky. That's an accepted standard.
Not only is it an accepted standard, but at this point, like I've shown you, people are literally on forums asking for when Blizzard will publish the next purchasable DLC user interface console skin.
Ugh. Yeah, people asking to be nickeled and dimed. Like, what? What is like?
Real.
How much fluoride is in the water now? Is the bummer just like sitting on a cactus canoe, just like dumping oceans of fluoride into the water? Is that how we got in here?
Yep.
Because it is this fucking crazy. That's fucking crazy. It feels like yesterday people were thinking, is this expansion worth the money? Now they're literally asking to be ripped off everywhere. They really have groomed a market of cucks.
Yes, it's fashionable to be a cuck now.
It sure is, because if you're living in Canada, you're a cuck. You're run by a French cuck. And cucking is basically your national anthem now.
Oh, man. I just can't believe that we're living in an age where Discord is literally running an operating system in order to keep itself functioning, and yet it's patched to include a store.
You ever notice how Discord has like an update every single day that doesn't actually do anything?
Yes.
It's always telling me there's an update. It's been doing that for months, and there's nothing actually there.
You know what's really funny is if you ever download the beta client called Canary, it will update at least 20 times in a day. So I don't know what the fuck they're changing, because the program isn't getting any better.
It's probably adjustments to their Bitcoin miner.
Yeah.
I'm just assuming that's the reason why there's so much memory, is it's just slowly mining butt coins.
From my butt.
That's also a thing that happened on Steam. Is a vast majority of these games with this middleware were published with Bitcoin miners, and people got upset about that, evidently, and only half of them got removed by their developers. I don't think Steam axed any of them, but Steam actually did something really bizarre a while ago. You may have noticed the increasing prevalence of H games showing up on Steam. Very, very thinly veiled H games that were censored, but the developers would then provide a link to the decensoring patch. And there was a few cases where this happened. I can't remember the first one, but the second case was Steam actually took down one of these games and sent the developers a message and basically said they had been censored. But it actually wasn't Steam as a company doing this. It was an SJW.
Yeah, it's just one guy
in Steam that did that broke authority. And I think like Gabe Newell intervened on I think it was Hatred that this happened for in the past, and he apparently put that back up himself. And then they put all this stuff back up on Steam, and there was like this this SJW Twitter account that was like, we manipulated people into censoring stuff on Steam. Yeah, go us, go girls.
Believe
and then
women.
within like half a day later, Steam made this announcement. By the way, we're not censoring anything at all. You can post whatever the fuck you want. And now the decensoring patches are entirely unnecessary, and it completely backfired. I think it's like one of the few good decisions that Steam has ever made.
Isn't it really puzzling though that there's like like it's taken that sort of behavior in order to get something good out of the company?
It's really confusing. That's like I expected Steam to really like double down and start banning left and right, because that's been what every other American business is doing. But Steam didn't, and that actually was really, really surprising. I think probably because they realized the H games, like it's a niche, sure. Probably not everybody is going to be owning the latest fucking Sakura game or whatever they are. But the thing is while there is a lot of Asian platforms that release those, because it's actually a really big thing, especially in Japan, there actually isn't really Western outlets for those. A lot of people order from Japan and then get their media confiscated at the Canadian border. And
Is that real?
that is real, actually. There are people who have had their stuff confiscated at the border because it was lewd. So
O_O.
yeah, it's fantastic. But as far as online distribution is concerned, there's a couple of, I'm pretty sure you can use some Japanese stuff, but evidently none of those are going to have the exposure that Steam is going to have. And evidently there's a market for this stuff, otherwise it wouldn't be such a big thing. So Steam decided, hey, this is market and money, so we're going to take that. We just added an option that says, oh, you don't like H games showing, well, you can just not list them. I wish they had the same for curators and stuff like that, because I don't want to see any of that crap.
Yeah, the curator system really confused me because, like, people. I think this actually got rolled out around the same time that the whole Gamergate fiasco happened, right? And at least it feels like it was adjacent in memory. I could be wrong about the exact specifics.
It's very similar.
It's just a weird thing, because you would think that this would be like a rallying, like a clarion call to, hey, let's stop this silliness from happening anymore. No more ridiculous, fucking overblown, networked like journalists who are completely destroying the ethics of journalism and completely like failing to abide by them. No more of that. Let's have honest journalism from now on. And then you just get fucking curators. I don't like that. What kind of fucking haha world are they living in?
Yeah, the Gamergate thing is insane. How they managed to.
I don't understand how they. Yeah, how did they manage to win that culture war? Like, I don't get that part.
I don't think they won, because.
Well, I mean, in the
like,
mainstream,
one arm
like,
they did win because they vilified a lot of people,
right, yeah.
But on the other hand, they lost badly because they showed to everybody who's paying attention what kind of scum they really are, and all the Gamergate stuff was entirely irrefutable. So anybody who's actually paying attention just lost all respect for. I don't think game reviewers and quote unquote journalists have any shred of respect left for them at all by anyone. But there's still people who don't realize that giving their websites and blogs and stuff hits is what's actually keeping them in business. So they won in that sense. That Gamergate and
Right, like
the
Kotaku
awareness
is
movement had
being,
more potential, but
yeah, Kotaku's being like kept afloat by hate clicks at this point.
yeah,
They
you just
really,
need them to piss off Hulk Hogan somewhere.
yeah. What was that? Gawker got destroyed by him.
Yeah, is I don't understand how those fucking websites can still be up. It's just lunacy. And I mean, like Steam is really bad for this too. You can't hide syndicated news. So Steam is just like this. Like anytime you look at a game on your library, you get this diarrhea just shoved down your throat from the syndicated news sites that nobody gives a fuck about. That Steam is just like giving them hits and redirecting their fucking blogs from. Like I don't give a fuck about what GameSpot or RPS or any of these other shill websites have to say about something. Like I only want, for example, what the developer has stated for update news, and that gets washed out by a sea of these shotgun articles that just tag as many things as possible to show up in Steam so they can get as many hits as possible. It's cancer. That's like the stuff that really drags Steam down. Is all the social networking crap is entirely unnecessary. You know, Steam chat, okay, but we don't need anything more than that. You know, we don't need to know what fucking achievements Billy got. We don't need to be burning bandwidth and making the client run at how slow it runs. You know, it takes like 30 seconds or more to go into tabs. So if it ever goes at all, you know, we can just take a load off the system and make the client run well and then get rid of syndicated crap, get rid of curators and this other trash and just focus on what makes the service a service. You know, pushing preferably decent products, whether it be production products or games or, you know, Eroge or something else. But the problem with these platforms is they try to fucking cater to everything. And that's Discord's problem too. Is like rather than at least make an attempt to make their program run well and improve like the audio quality and stuff, they're just tacking on garbage that only an incredibly minority are gonna even give a shit about. Because most people are not stupid enough to feed these people money. And the few that are, chances are they already own most of the stuff anyways. It'll probably catch on to an extent. You'll probably have some people who will be like, hey, Discord's used by people. We can use it to try to market. But the overlap with Steam and Steam's prominence means it's probably not really going to be taking off too well. It'll probably be successful to an extent. Being a middleman is always successful because you basically do nothing and get free money for it. But Valve won't be sweating anything off of this.
Yeah, I think that's really the problem, is because I don't think that Discord ever was in a position to actually jockey for some sort of market dominance or some sort of, cracking the code that is this insane monopoly that we have in games and in the industry in general. I don't think that there was really ever a chance in hell of them being able to come away with that. But what I do think is really unfortunate is that I think that this just shows, a further established trend that developers will just sit there and, they're more likely, anyways, to try to make some sort of weird, stillborn copycat of a service as opposed to try to actually develop a proper answer. And yet they'll always market it as if it's a proper answer. It goes back to our conversation some time ago about cargo cults with Brood War and how everybody wanted to be the next Brood War killer with their RTS back in like 2001. And then it was the Warcraft 3 that they tried to copy off of and redo. And I feel like now we're at that point with Steam. We've been at that point with Steam and YouTube for quite some time. These giant market dominant in their own field services, if you can even call YouTube a service, that control everything completely. And Discord doing this, I think, is actually just, again, it's like it's not every time that something in this trend in this industry does not buck the trend of releasing something that's completely worthless and something that has no staying power. It's just going to sit there and sort of like struggle to stay afloat or fade into obscurity. I think largely Uplay and Origin are just sort of inconveniences to the average consumer in the games industry. They're certainly not at the forefront of everybody's mind, and I think the only reason Uplay gets any action at all is probably because people actually play that Rainbow Six Siege game, and that's like has a relatively large community for like an online game released in this year that isn't already pre-established like CS:GO or League of Legends or whatever. But aside from that, I don't think anybody really uses these third-party DRMs. Right? They all use Steam for their third-party DRM, and that's their main platform. And so every time somebody enters into the space, but does so in a half-cocked manner, where they're not actually ready and prepared to go all the way with their ideas and make sure that they are actually going to invest in some sort of the ideal scenario being that they succeed in toppling the market dominance and cracking that open for themselves and for other prospective developers, then this trend continues to grow in that direction of them, Steam and YouTube having this market dominance, having this lion's share of everything, and thus we never get anywhere. We just sit here and continue to be fucked as consumers, for lack of a better word.
Yeah. Most people are really adverse to change. You can see that with brand dominance, Blizzard, etc. And especially with software, like production software is a really big one as well. But even stuff like Steam, most people aren't willing to change something. So if you want to challenge a platform like Steam or even a very, very shaky platform like Discord, you really have to actually put in the effort, which means you need to do research into the exact things that people like out of it and that people don't like out of it. People like convenience and ease of access, and Steam allows you to basically just spend your money at a whim. And that's really one of the most powerful things about it. It's very, very DRM heavy, but the DRM is kind of hidden from you. You're only going to really notice the DRM when you get completely fucked by it. For example, when they drop XP support. So the thing about Uplay and everything like that is right off the bat, they were really, really, really poorly received because they weren't properly thought out. You have Blizzard's launcher. It's absolutely atrocious in performance. It's really, really bad in performance. Even the layman is going to see that when something performs that badly. And to add insult to injury, then you had stuff like that overweight league thing that was popping up and trying to distract you out of the launcher. That was also destroying performance, apparently. I couldn't really notice because it was already unusably bad. And the interface and everything like that is really terribly laid out. So people have evidently noticed these things right off the bat. Steam hasn't really changed too much in terms of its library layout and things like that since it was launched. It's pretty much remained static. They've recolored some stuff. It's the new stuff they've added that's turned it into total cancer, like the community hub and stuff like that. It's just atrocious. Infinitely scrolling pages are all garbage and cancer, and that's why people stay away from those. But the core routine is pretty similar. They've started injecting stuff into it, which I think is really detrimental to their cause. But it works, and the process of pushing by and then getting into the library is very simple, and most people aren't going to break away from that. Discord already has ensured they can't compete with that by adding a paywall to even get to the store in the first place. So the paywall means that most people won't bother. Because again, this is like indie games and shit that if people were actually interested in, they probably already own. They'll pay less for if they just buy it on Steam to begin with. And chances are, if you're using Discord, you're probably using Steam. I highly doubt anybody who is brave enough to use Discord isn't already getting their paws whole negged by Steam. So this is just redundancy. Because adding features generates more buzz than fixing problems. Fixing problems benefits everybody, and the features maybe affect a small portion of their user base at best, but it generates more buzz. It's much nicer to say Discord added a store rather than Discord fixed some memory usage. It just reads better on BuzzFeed and 9gag and iFunny. So that's what they do. iFunny Co. And that's why they do it. It's primarily for PR, really. The PR is valuable. More hits is more hits and more revenue and more data to mine and stuff like that. And like I said, the product of Discord is not really their story. You are the product. Your information is the product. We are reaching a very sinister time where companies are actually realizing that ad revenue is not really that great anymore. In large part because the average user has realized that ads are actually a huge security threat. And, uBlock Origin and uMatrix and NoScript and stuff like that are considered like irreplaceable assets. Only the retards who use Chrome don't realize the value of these add-ons. Most people are going to be stuck to using either the cancerous new Firefox and its butchered down SJW version of it, or in more likelihood they're sticking to old versions of Firefoxes, or they're using forks of Firefoxes such as Pale Moon or WaterFox to stay away from the telemetry and other crap that Firefox has been adding. And Microsoft kind of helped that as well by the huge shit show that was Windows 10. And in all likelihood, the data mining in Windows 10 is not even really that threatening for your security. It's probably just performance monitoring. But the thing is it created a lot of very, very negative awareness of this is the state of software, is your data and your metrics, so to say, your habits and your identity is much more valuable than just ads, because this is information you can use to shape your ads to be far more efficient. And of course, you may have remembered way back when games were talking about actually placing ads inside of the game. Like, for example, a racing game may have actual real world ads on its banners. That was stuff that was being talked about like 10, 15 years ago. And we are reaching that stage now. I think there's some games I've seen. Well, an easy example, although not really related, is the esports banners within Dota and Riot, League of Legends. Is things like that accept actual advertisements. I believe there are some games out there that do actually do that, but it's more integrated into the operating system now. As a result, Windows 10, trying to inject ads everywhere, trying to make everything about the App Store, always constantly redirecting to the concept of purchasing things. And Google and Android as well are very, 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 very bad for that. And it's just really not a safe space to be a consumer at this stage. And most people just accept that. So it's it's about just adding stuff and distracting away from problems, because everybody usually is innately aware of that things are performing badly and slower and slower and slower. I think it's like impossible to ignore that. But just reading headlines about how new stuff is being added still reads better than existing problems being fixed. It's much easier to forget about problems than to acknowledge them. So that's distraction oriented marketing is obviously a super big deal in digital software, and Discord knows that very well. If you read their patch notes, it's just filled with cringy, over the top memes and references and buzzwords that try to wash over the severity of issues or the fact that they're not actually really doing anything productive at all.
Yeah, well,
The
that
innumerable
really
times that
pisses
Discord
me
came up.
off because it's like, now we fix this issue, and they really like completely ignore the fact that there was an issue at that point. They really try to make it so that I think you are right that the optics of the situation always read better if you're adding something new than fixing something that's already existed. So they usually, I think they've created like an entirely separate category for like bug fixes or whatever, or they like, or maybe it was the other way around where they mix it in with other like news, like so you, sort of some sugar to make the medicine go down kind of deal.
Yeah. It's PR and marketing is just one of those things that is, you have information to give, but the way in which you shape that information completely changes the value of it. Just certain ways of saying things is so much more powerful, or can even completely warp the intent and value of things. And unfortunately, again, in a platform that is not regulated in any shape or fashion, there's no consequences for, abusing consumers, or other shit that would just be illegal in any given industry, like what Blizzard does. You just get away with anything. You can get away with misinformation. You can get away with lying to people, and you don't really have to worry about consequences. Like, some people are going to call you out, but they just get lost in the people who are yes men because they prefer to hear good things rather than not. So when it
Yes.
comes to software releases, even in something that doesn't incur or involve finances whatsoever, like in Feat software in Linux distributions, it's the reading through like actual objective reviews for the various distributions. It's absolute lunacy, just utter lunacy. You know, the Linux community is actually tearing itself apart right now because some SJWs are trying to push a SJW agenda into the service, and a lot of people are jumping ship because it's turning something that wasn't at all political into a political agenda, and most people don't like that. The eggplant thing actually does have real world, like all this stuff comes from the same sort of roots. The eggplant thing I think comes from GitHub. Somebody posted an eggplant emoticon, and other people thought they were being sexist through some meaning. So by extent of that hilarity, but very 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 amusing situation, that was unfortunately very real. The eggplant did actually become synonymous of being a sexual emoticon, not because it innately was a sexual emoticon, but because the butthurt liberals made it that way. And there's a lot, like, some points it's hard to tell if something is trolling or not, but there was people who were complaining about the naming conventions of functions and stuff like master slave, even though that's the way the functions and stuff work, and they just want to like completely redefine the language of all these scripting languages and stuff because of just, I don't know, they like conjure something that they think is a microaggressor and decide that they have to like jump into something because they desperately need attention about it. So I had this code of conduct or something like that that showed up, and I don't really know the intricacies of it, unfortunately, but it people are like destroying communities over this shit right now, and I wish I could actually dig this up right now, but I'm kind of tired and not really sure where it is. But like, digital software is a fucking mess no matter where you go. So Roll20, I may or may not have mentioned this to some extent in the past, but Roll20 is a online platform for Dungeons and Dragons primarily. You can run most tabletop stuff through it, but primarily for Dungeons and Dragons. And its founders are SJWs. And there was somebody who posted something on their Reddit, and I think it was something in regards to the fact that the platform received like $90,000 or $40,000 or something when it was first, like, it was a Kickstarter, right? And then it launched, and they have not touched it ever since. They have not fixed anything ever since. Actually, if you know where to look, you can actually find Chrome and Firefox add-ons that add basic user interfaces to it because it's a website, right?
Right.
So these add-ons will actually like fix parts of the user interface and add features and stuff. So this person added something, posted on Reddit and was asking or something like that, you know, why you guys got so much money and didn't do anything with it. And of course that got deleted or something, like got censored or deleted, like someone flipped their shit over it, like one of the developers. And that cost them a lot of subscribers. And but it's an honest fucking question that you as a developer should really be thinking about. Like Roll20 is used by tons of people, and this platform remains incredibly stagnant and, you know, feature incomplete and very, very, very unperformant. It is incredibly clunky, incredibly bloated, and very, very buggy. And I have used this since early 2016 and mid 2016. I've used it almost weekly and often daily since then. I've never seen any improvement to it whatsoever since then. It literally hasn't been touched. And it makes you think, like, back to Discord. This piece of shit hasn't been touched since I started using it either. Steam, I've used that for over a decade. All I've seen is that it got worse. Sure, some neat software like Substance Designer was released on it, but Steam has progressively gotten slower and slower and slower, more and more bloated, and added more and more crap that I, as a consumer and as a developer, couldn't give two shits about. And never will and never have. It's shit just being tacked on for the sake of it because some programmer needs to convince his boss he still deserves a paycheck. So I can add some features to your platform. And investors nod their head and they're like, okay, go ahead. And then you end up with this whale, this beached whale flopping around, spewing oil everywhere, and Gore Bush charging in head first.
Don't get me excited. I think that ultimately you have a lot of. I mean, that's I think the entire sort of fear of anything that's market dominant is always related to this, right? Stagnation, the fact that they don't have to work very hard to offer something genuine, something feature complete, something that advances and improves over time, so that they can still swindle, customers, right? Like still allow customers to feel safe in their purchase or feel justified in their purchase. And instead, if you want to use these platforms, you have to accept that you have no other choice. So if you want to get into something like this on a public level, like you want to have, like Discord, like you said, is a lot less stable. It's a lot more new, right? So it's competing with like Skype, but Skype destroyed itself. It's competing with TeamSpeak, but TeamSpeak is like outdated at this point.
They've all committed seppuku.
Right, yeah. So for a time, anyways, it was competing with a variety of different apps. At least when it launched, it was competing with TeamSpeak and Skype. And
what really secured Discord was AIM's death.
Right, yeah.
Because most people stuck to AIM. AIM was, AOL is not a name that ever inspires confidence. Like, you can't say the name AOL, and anybody who knows what it is, nobody's going to be inspired by confidence in that. But AIM was a service that worked. It allowed transfers up to 2 gigabytes in size. And at a speed Discord can't even compare to 15 years ago. And it very, very rarely had issues. And you used a third-party client like Trillian. Trillian was bloated as fuck. It used maybe 90 megabytes of RAM. And that was considered bloated. 90 megabytes of RAM. And now, the same client, which offers less features than AIM, where you would have to pay money to transfer a mere 50 fucking megabytes, is that much more wasteful? Like, come on. But AIM died, right? And that's what postured Discord for success, really.
Yeah, it's a combination of older and more feature complete, more competitive services dying out or becoming obsolete, and the fact that, when you talk about Steam and YouTube, these, like you said earlier, age has been very nice for these particular services in terms of the public eye, because people say, it's just an assumption, right? If you say that you make videos, people say, what's your YouTube channel? They don't say, where do you make videos on? They probably don't even immediately ask you what you make videos about. The first thing they're going to ask you is like, they assume you have a YouTube channel. It's just like, when I was in high school, all of the kids were like, what's your Facebook? Like they just assumed that you have it, right? So it's like market dominance. Like it dominates not just the sphere of influence around the whatever it's like potentially supposed to be a service for. Like YouTube is a video curating service, so you watch videos as a user, you make videos as a developer or whatever. Steam is obviously for games. It's not just about that. It's like the culture is so attuned and accustomed to diverting and defaulting to those, right? The same with Google. Like I did that earlier today, where instead of saying I searched this up, I said I Googled it, because like that's just what you do. And there's a level of power that you get when you have that sort of control over society, where you're literally, your brand recognition is so far exceeding any other person's reasonable expectations that this is what you got. Like that's a level of accomplishment that very few apps or very few services or programs or brands will ever get to. And the fact that these particular programs are there, if it wasn't these guys, it probably would be another kind. But we should be trying to get this stuff out of here. Like it's a really old system, and it's not serving us well at all as consumers, because we're still the ones getting shafted every time these developers, these services want to update something to improve their business model in some way. Like YouTube updates its user interface to look more mobile. Nobody wants that. Literally nobody wants that. Nobody enjoys the new UI. And yet they still get away with it because there is no competitor. There's no competition. And the idea that you can just do insane shit like with, you're just describing with Trillion and AOL, AIM, and you compare that to Discord now, like the reason why there's actually a regression is not because that's like evolution, right? Because it's the opposite. It's because there's no competition that will hold a candle to Discord anymore, right? So if you want, in terms of like the cultural impact, Discord is the go-to, it seems now. Or at least it's fast establishing itself as the go-to, as the default for chat. Nobody asks me for Skype anymore. Nobody asks me for any of that. They ask me what my Discord is. And I feel like that, especially swimming in gaming circles as I do, that's going to be more and more common, more and more established as the norm. Nobody uses Ventrilo anymore, unfortunately, because that is the best one, it seems, that still has survived into the modern era. But aside from that, if you want to do a voice interview, it's either still Skype for some psychotic reason, or it's Discord. If you want to do a video interview, if you want to just talk to your friends, and you're not using something like one of these crazy bloated mobile apps like Snapchat, which for some reason downloads like half a gigabyte if you just want to use the filters. Like, it's insane. So, if you're not using something like that on your phone, if you're just talking about desktop computing or whatever, then you're going to be networking, quote unquote, with these people over Discord, over YouTube, over Steam, so on and so forth. And you're not really going to see much else. And I feel like that's really insane. That's a really insane world that we have now occupied. And who the fuck knows where it's going to go from here, because I have a feeling that that beached whale analogy you gave is more accurate than we will hopefully ever live to find out.
Yeah, it's a big issue because it's, if you want to set up like an XMPP or whatever it is server, let me see here. I'll tell you what it is in a second. If you want to set up one of these, special services, you don't want to deal with censorship and tracking and logging and all this other crap. You still need somewhere to contact these people. Yes, XMPP. So I use a service that's just, hosted by, it's like a private service just between individuals on their servers. If you want to set up something like that, you still need some way to pre-establish contact with these people, and ideally you probably do it like through email or something, but I don't trust Google with my email either. I wouldn't use that for a business liaison if I could avoid it. And the company is, so many people put all this trust in them. It's like Facebook and YouTube. People put so much trust in these companies, and all they've ever done is screw you over constantly. And they're selling your information. You know that you're their product. Why do you continue to put trust in these people? What did they do to earn your respect? They didn't. They did nothing. They just gave you some half-ass piece of shit that was more convenient to use than whatever the other thing was. That isn't fucking loyalty or trust. That's just, shifting into the lowest denominator. And far too many people take that. So, of course, you've got, people getting trolled on YouTube by the fucking YouTube heroes, and Google just turning a blind eye to the rampant abuse, the shadow banning, the censorship, all this other crap, the busted interface. And the mobile stuff really gets me because I've been using a tablet for the last half year or so, playing various games and stuff on it, and touch interfaces don't work on touch screens. Touch screens don't work at all. They're garbage. I don't know how the fuck this stuff got popular because it doesn't work. It has never worked. It is horrible to use any interface on a fucking touch screen. But dedicated touch screens on touch screen interfaces still don't fucking work. They're horrible. It's like the Wiimote. It's like, oh, check out this motion tracking. No, it's just as shit as 6-axis. It's awful. Stop doing this crap.
But how am I going to put in motion controls so you can control Dragon?
I still have to play that fucking game. I probably get very pissed off. I've heard
I thought you already played it.
No, I have not played Lair yet. But I remember reading way back that it's one of those games that'll probably make you kill yourself because of the way the controls are. I mean, I tried to use a fucking Wiimote and that was horrible, and the 6-axis is a lot worse than that, so.
Oh, no, you know what it was? It was Heavenly Sword, because I remember you played the PS3 launch titles, and I think that did have some 6-axis shit in it, right? Because it was obligatory.
It did. There was a reason why Six Axis ceased to exist after the launch titles. Even those developers realized how bad it was. It's bad. Like, it's just one of those memes. It's like, oh, stop motion controls.
I
Just
think
start
that's really
adding in
funny.
more crap.
Like, think about that too, because that's also related, isn't it? I mean, it's just like
Yeah.
people adding features for the sake of fucking adding features so that they can increase their little list there of features that they have over their competitors. Like, our motion control is
Yep.
better than their motion control, even though nobody fucking uses motion control. Like, I can't believe Nintendo sold the Wii as a gimmick. They literally sold a gimmick as a console. Like, why are like the fact that consoles are still in business at all is insane. But you're gonna tell me that you're
Yeah.
able to sell a gimmick? Really? That's real?
It's real. It is very, very real. It is so real, in fact, the mobile market, I'm pretty sure, is overshadowing the PC market right now.
Yeah, I think it's more, certainly more in terms of prices because obviously everybody buys like there's usually like a one time purchase of like $2 or something, and then although I've seen some of these games go up to for $10, which is insane, and then you'll get all of the microtransactions to speed up or pay to win or whatever.
I'm working on an article about my experience with gacha games. I think the numbers are gonna surprise you. They are like, you hear about whales and stuff burning money, and you think, oh man, that one guy in fucking China is insane. He spent $1,000 in these games. You think it's like an outlier if someone spent that much money. The base prices in these games is absolutely fucking insane. I think I may have listed them off at one point, but when you put them all together and you realize that these are actually basically the biggest games in the world right now. Maybe World of Warcraft compares on its release revenue, or like Call of Duty or whatever, comparing the release revenue. But these games, some of these games are like up to 8 years old or more, and they're still going really strong. Like Puzzle and Dragons, for example, or other games like Fate Grand Order, where they can afford to run it at a loss. Apparently, are so popular in their home country that they just don't give a fuck. And I'm gonna I know I listed off some of this stuff at some point, but see, that's the thing. Those business models, they work. I don't know how the fuck people justify spending as much money on it as they do, even casually. Because even casual expenditures on this game is as much. Like, I was talking about Soul Calibur 6 being insanely expensive. Well, let's say I wanted to do 2 10 summons in Fate Grand Order. That's actually going to cost me more than Soul Calibur 6. And I'm probably going to get nothing out of it because they're so biased. It's like a 1% chance to get a 5-star or whatever it is, and that's insane. That's absolutely fucking nuts. Puzzle and Dragons, it costs $1 for one magic stone. One magic stone will restore your stamina, so you can play one more dungeon, or revive you once in a dungeon if you die. So it's like piecemeal crap sold at a premium, far exceeding any realistic comparison whatsoever. Like, you can't justify those prices by any stretch of the imagination whatsoever. The games are basically free to run for the developers because their netcode is like transaction based. I think it was called, and it's like a very, 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 very low demand on servers to run these games, and a chunk of that's also offloaded to Google to begin with because of the APK files are, I believe, hosted on Google's shit. So it's, but these games, these are the biggest games. And that's why the model works. That's why you got season passes. Because the thing is the companies just do whatever. Like I said, time and time again, companies do what makes them money. Like, Discord is obviously financially successful by extent of data mining and Nitro and all this other crap, that they can afford to just ignore all the problems because nobody holds them accountable for it. Nobody with any real clout or no sizable number of people is willing to stop and say, hey, how about you actually work on making your software a piece of quality software instead of the shovelware it currently is, and then we'll think about supporting you and using it. Nobody has any fucking standards. They just take it in the ass and they like it. So that goes for fucking everything. Steam hasn't really changed at all, except getting slower and slower and more bloated. People are not leaving the platform because it's getting more and more bloated. They're just taking it in the ass. They're just accepting it. Windows 10 turns out to be a huge shit show. It doesn't actually really do anything over Windows 7, except for some things like DirectX 12 being locked behind it for arbitrary reasons. Some people are stopping and saying, "Hey, this is not good." But the thing is again, because of the market dominance and stuff like that, a lot of these people basically their voice is just lost. That doesn't mean anything. What would stop Microsoft is if all the DRM licenses and the businesses and stuff said, "Hey, we're no longer using Windows." And I believe a chunk of them are refusing to use. I mean, they can't use Windows 10 anyways because their software is archaic and stuff like that. But it's like not big enough to actually really change them. There's actually people out there who think Microsoft is actually gaining popularity off of telemetry and stuff like that. Like there's just so much lack of information and misinformation and shilling. And while a large number of people realize that things are going for the worse, they can do nothing about it except just accept it or move on to another medium. But you can't even really do that. Like, how can you escape Google's all-knowing eyes? They have fucking photographs of your entire house. They know literally everything about you by extent of third-person interactions regardless. There is motion tracking and motion capture and facial recognition software built into cameras all over the fucking street. You're living in like some fucking cyberpunk, horror story. That is reality right now. It's just people have just accepted it. And so when you get fed low quality products and you ask why was this successful, it's because nobody stopped and said, "Hey, don't give us low quality products." Like when people can fucking tell me that it's actually impossible for developers to be lazy, like when they actually genuinely believe that, now you know that you really are in the deep end. And then worrying about Steam and stuff like that, it's like the least of your fucking concerns. There's like something just inherently wrong with people mentally.
I think I have to do some serious looking and digging into the this like market dominance shit. See like what's going on with the ownership stuff behind the scenes. If I can find out, I'm sure a lot of the stuff is like public knowledge by virtue of having to be like legally, but nobody ever bothers to look into it. I'm sure there's some really scary shit you can find on just by doing some searches. But I do want to echo your point about like escaping Google. For example, they're in your phone or tablet, whatever source of degeneracy you seem to cater towards. They're in your computer, of course. They're part of your search engine. They're part of your entertainment. They are, so they're actually running your phone and some entire laptops like Chromebooks, which is like the most insane fucking thing I've ever heard of.
Yeah, that is lunacy.
Yeah, it's just only comes installed with Chrome OS. I guess Chrome is probably running an OS even on most computers. And then
it uses enough RAM to be running an OS, that's for sure.
If you want to try to like avoid Google, you probably also are performance and security conscious enough to want to avoid Apple and Microsoft. So really your only recourse for a phone would be those Huawei phones from China, which are probably just as bad and somehow owned by Tencent to bring it all back. And then you've got what else? Well, of course, Microsoft is in the picture because not for phones per se, but obviously for operating systems. So they have complete market dominance over operating systems. The Apple's sort of they're making money, they're staying afloat, but they're just fucking garbage in terms of their products, so nobody's going to bother with them. And even if they did, did you know that this is another insane thing? Google writes Apple a $3 million check annually so that they will keep Google as the default search engine for Apple phones and devices.
That doesn't surprise me at all.
Because Bing is actually profitable just because Microsoft defaults it to it, along with its Microsoft Edge
there was
browser.
a lot. There is a lot of shit regarding that alone. It's funny you're bringing that up because it was brought to my attention recently that Google got smashed in European Union again for having all this default stuff on their phones and shit. Like all this pre-installed garbage.
Yeah, I got a new phone 2 days ago, and I had to spend about 3 hours uninstalling a bunch of pre-built shit.
Yeah.
So
So apparently, I don't know the specific details of it, but they have to sell those individually now. They can't just pre-bundle it. It's kind of like the Microsoft thing where the Windows install doesn't it, like presents you with a choice of browsers and stuff. And you can't. They don't just like forcibly bundle Internet Explorer and that's it, and don't mention anything else. It's
right,
kind of funny. Like the European Union has some really weird, very very bizarre things going on, but some of their decisions, just for the sake of trolling potential, it's really going to screw over Google because nobody will willingly install this crap. Like nobody will willingly buy and install their garbage that really pays attention whatsoever because it's just junk. So they're gonna actually lose out on quite a bit as a result of that. It's fantastic. There needs to be more stuff like that. There needs to be more people just like walking into Google's office and just taking a dump in their seats when they're not looking. I really, really hope Trump gets angry enough to actually like do stuff to them as a result of their security leaks and stuff like that. Because
well, people would need to actually put some financial and political pressure on these representatives. Unfortunately, like even though you'd think that because the people are the ones who vote, you would have fealty to them. You could just sway public opinion if you have enough money by investing in marketing. Mm. So you're just fucked. These big corporations will just
that's how
give you kisses.
It's all business. Every single step away, it's a business. Yeah. So you can't. That's why politics is so stupid. That's why I don't get into political debates, because there's no point in arguing about anything you don't actually have any power.
Well, not only do you not have any power, but half the arguments that are, especially that are going to be broadcast through the mainstream, are likely broadcast deliberately because they wanted. I feel like a lot of it is just a distraction, even though I don't know what the fuck I'd pay attention to, because I don't pay attention to that stuff anyways. But even if I decided to pay attention to politics and I wanted to avoid the mainstream silliness, what would I pay attention to? Like, what is it that they're trying to make you not pay attention to, right? What are these... I probably am coming across as a bit of a lunatic because I'm saying they all the time. I promise you, I'm not talking about Jews.
And Jews did 9/11.
Fuck yeah, gays caused the Holocaust. That's my favorite voice sample from. I think that's from Infowars. It sounds like it's Mr. Jones.
I don't think so, actually.
Oh, you know what? Maybe it's that same guy that was like.
Lunatics.
Yeah, maybe it was the same guy that was talking about
gay thought police.
What did he say? He said homosexual stormtroopers. That's another sound bit. I like how you had to do basically no work to make them sound insane.
Yeah, it's like when you think these fucking right-wing people are insane because you hear about them on TV and shit. But then when you actually like sit down, like I go to Right Wing Watch and download their videos and audio and put them together for the Harry Potter albums. And you actually like just listen to what they fucking say. And you realize these people probably actually believe a half of it. And you realize that the whole fucking planet is just beyond recourse. The right, left, they're both insane in their own way. And like half of the shit Alex Jones says makes perfect fucking sense. And he's probably right about. Especially whenever he's talking about the tech industry and the mass censorship and other shit they've got going on. And then he turns around and says that people can be killed with TV signals. And it's just like you just go full stop and just starts really scratching your head wondering if...
Well, no, that's the thing.
Propane.
This Alex Jones guy was right about a lot of things. And one of those things was that insane fucking like worship of owl monuments that all of the leaders of heads of state gathered to in some... I forget the actual place, what it's called. It's some field. And they go to this like place once a year or something, and they just sit there and worship. They just work. I guess it's like a giant owl statue of some kind, and it's like, oh, Bohemian Grove. Thank you, Shirtclastic in the chat. Bohemian Grove. It's you should look into this if you haven't seen it. I'll see if I can find something after the podcast, but that's just an insane thing. Like people, they really go there, and Alex Jones. Obviously, that sounds like an insane conspiracy that you would find on Infowars, and that's where you could find it. But it was true. It was real. Like, they really do this. They still do this. So like that's insane. Like I remember, okay, I have a personal anecdote here. My uncle's also a conspiracy theorist, and basically like he sees conspiracy in everyday mundane things. Like he was picking me up one day, and he drove past this store that had recently changed ownership, and he's like, "Oh, some Muslims bought that store, and they've had it for X amount of time, and yet it's never open." And they just they go in there. So sometimes I sit out here and I watch them. I'm like, okay, buddy. And so he thinks that there's like some drug ring there. He thinks that the mayor of my town is like personally sending people to like destroy his windows and stuff because his stuff just gets vandalized all the time. So he's pretty insane. So whatever. He's a drug-addled lunatic like the rest of my family. But he did have this one line that I still remember to this day, where I could tell he really believed this. Wasn't just something he was saying because it was fun to say and fun to pretend that you believed in or something, which sort of like I thought maybe that was the case for some of the more insane claims that he made. But there was this one point where in his explanation, where normally he's like shouting to the sky and he's talking about all this stuff really loudly and boisterously because he's trying to put on a show, almost as like a performance in a way. Yet the way that he was phrasing this stuff, he like got really quiet and started whispering and like looked really freaked out. And he said that there was like some meet of like all the heads of state met up and had homosexual intercourse, I think were his words. And he was whispering it really, really quietly. And then like some years later, I found out the Bohemian Grove stuff, and I wonder, maybe my uncle is Alex Jones.
I think your uncle has talked to David Manning. I am very, very certain that's something David Manning mentioned at some stage. Also, that Starbucks puts semen in coffee to turn people gay.
Yeah, well, once they got a taste for the cock.
Anybody who's listening to this, if you do not know about David Manning, I highly recommend researching him. He is a absolutely fantastic black pastor who, in his own words, went around breaking into people's houses and threatening them with shotguns, and then was tempted by the devil and almost turned gay when he was in prison, and then moved on to warn the world about homosexuals and their American Express cards. All the while being exceptionally racist against black people. Is very, very entertaining.
I just don't get it, man. Why? Why are people fucked up? Why? What happened to them? Are they okay?
They didn't take part in the gay coffee.
Right.
Alex Jones. The thing about Alex Jones and people like him is you have to realize they make a lot of money off of their personality, like they're color casters.
Oh yeah, people have said that. Yeah, people have said that Alex Jones is completely different off camera when they meet him. Is like the nicest guy you'll ever meet, and blah blah blah. And maybe some of that's for PR. They say the same
about PewDiePie or whoever it is.
Yeah.
Whenever I've heard about, like, when I started casting, people are like, "Oh my god, I hate PewDiePie," and I'm like, "I don't even know who the fuck this is. I don't have any interest in this. Why are you mentioning this in my chat?" And then like years later, people are like, "Oh, this PewDiePie guy is such an immature caster, but in person he is such a nice guy, and he's really down to earth and all this other stuff." And he's just a businessman. He's just, he has a personality and he sells it, and there's apparently a lot of people that like it because he's really popular. And
then Disney destroyed him. He was, I don't know if you paid attention to this like 2 years ago or a year ago. This is when the adpocalypse hit because PewDiePie was saying some, what did he do? He was on Fiverr and he was like demonstrating how this website, if you're not familiar with, you can, basically the idea is that you can pay $5 or some other amount based on the contractors that you're hiring out here to do some like odd job shit, and usually it's like video creation of some kind, like they film a video. And so to demonstrate this, PewDiePie reached out to this Indian these two twin brothers, I guess, that were Indian, and he got them to hold up signs that were like something about like, it was basically like Hitler stuff. He was like saying "gas the Jews" or something like that, and they were like holding up these signs while dancing and have like funny music playing, and they were saying like insane things. And he's like, look how easy it is. I can do this. I can get these guys to do these insane things. And then he does that. He did that for a video, right? And there's like a bit. And then so Disney just destroyed his partnership deal. They canceled everything. They tried to get him destroyed. And, all over that. And then the Wall Street Journal as well At some point. I guess they published an article as a result of this. They really tried to smear him for this, which is like what pressured, I guess, Disney. I'm probably getting the timeline of events fucked up because it's just so insane that I couldn't follow all of it. But there was one moment that I remember where the Stormtrooper, no, not Stormtrooper. What the fuck is that website? Daily Stormer, Daily Stormtrooper, and the sign said "Death to all Jews." Thank you again, Shirk. The So that was the sign, and then the Daily Stormer had like set their banner or something to say like the number one PewDiePie fan site or something because they were like loving the death to the Jews thing, and then somebody at the Wall Street Journal was like, and citing that as a piece of evidence that PewDiePie was a white supremacist. And so then, like a week later or something, this Daily Stormer changed it to the number one Wall Street Journal fan site or something. And so it just got more and more insane, where they were like taking shots back and forth. And I never thought I would see the day where like the Wall Street Journal was 1v1ing the Daily Stormer of all places, and then there was like this. Then PewDiePie hired that Indian team again to do something else insane, where they like dug up a bunch of insane tweets from the writer of that article in the Wall Street Journal that were really fucked up, like subject matter wise. It was like taboo jokes or whatever, which obviously you don't really give a shit about. But if somebody else is saying that, like it's the throwing stones in glass houses analogy, and the Indian guys were like showing all these tweets on stream or on screen, and they were like, "Context matters, Ben." And then he got destroyed too. I think he got fired. So that's actually, I think, what kickstarted this whole idea of like just looking through people's social media and finding insane things. Like there was an esports writer, Jacob Wolf, who was trying. They were trying to get him fired. The mob tried to get him fired from his job at ESPN, and it was because he said "faggot" in a tweet, like when he was literally 13. Like this guy's like a kid, or maybe he's 18. I don't know. So that's just another dose of insanity for you.
Yes, I got a little taste of that when StarCraft 2 had just come out, and people still cared about that, and there was casters that people didn't like, so you had that was the founding of what I guess is the Reddit witch hunt, where they would hunt down something somebody said in some completely unrelated platform, and it would somehow be evidence enough to scare investors into pulling out.
Yeah,
and sponsors.
That is a really strange rule because it's selectively enforced depending on who's the recipient of it, at least on most Reddits that are of note. But that's also just Reddit's just an insanely degenerate site filled with insane people. And as a casual observer, I go there a couple times a week or whatever, just for the communities that I know to be really, really insane for like entertainment or whatever. But it probably does drop my IQ. I probably should try to wean myself off of that because there's
okay. If you watch Rick and Morty, your IQ will go back up.
Oh, okay. So there is a way to get it.
You gotta balance it out. Balance out your exposure.
There you go. Well, towards the end of the podcast, was there any gaming related news you wanted to talk about for our Discord podcast? Any fun experiences you've been having with phone games that you would like to share?
I'm sure there was something I would have mentioned at some point, but I don't really remember, to be honest. Not really. No, I don't really have anything interesting. I haven't really done too much. I've been too fucking busy or drained.
Right.
There was your general flow of shit being released on Steam and then bombing and immediately going free to play in terms of MMOs. You had Blast Online, which was like, well, to really understand the insanity of Blast Online, you kind of got to get in the history of NCSoft, because they were making, I think the way it goes, I may be wrong in some context, this is just off the top of my memory, but I think the way it goes is they're making Lineage 3. And I think some developers or something happened where people left the company or whatever, they got into possession of assets or something from it. And they stole these assets and then they made Terra. Because I distinctly remember something about a lawsuit between those two companies. But whatever happened, Terra still got released. And Terra was something of a promising MMO because it had an action RPG. gameplay as opposed to point and click like World of Warcraft, for example. But Terra was just basically World of Warcraft, and then it got westernized and it got pushed into en masse. And en masse very, very quickly proved they were one of the worst localization companies in the industry. And they stripped a lot of features from the game and really fucked it up. And then the game went completely cancerous. You could pay $30 for a loot box and get nothing out of it, etc. The kind of the standard fare you expected of games today. But back then, it was still considered pretty taboo to have loot boxes. And then I don't think the Lineage 3 ever fucking happened. There is actually a new Lineage game on the phones. I kind of wanted to try, but my tablet doesn't have any hard drive space. It's kind of old. But I might try it on an emulator and see if it works sometime, because I'm actually really curious at what they did with it. In any case, you then had Bless, and I really don't know what Bless's story is. It kind of seemed to come out of nowhere. But it was basically Terra, except with newer assets. And it was made by, or at least published by NeoWiz, which apparently has quite a negative history in the West. And this game was going to be released in the West a while ago, as far as I knew, but then it got delayed forever. And then the Korean version came out and bombed, and apparently the Russian version came out and bombed. It came out in the US, and this was another, like, it was like Terra's another action game. It was kind of like I was mostly researching it way back in StarCraft 2 because I was ripping assets from it. And so, but it was kind of like HKS usually like plays these MMOs, or at least looks into them, seeing if they're interesting. So we decided to try it out when it came out, and it was, I got some XXE footage lined up for it. It's an absolute fucking disaster. But not even 2 or 3 months after its release, it's already announced it's going to go free to play. And there's pretty strong evidence suggesting they took all the budget out of the PC and put it into a completely unrelated game and just ditched the PC game entirely. And now there's an Unreal 4 Xbox Xbone only version of Blast called Blast Unleashed or something. I don't know anything about it. But suffice to say, it's not the version that's on the PC version. They just basically did a hit and run and stole everybody's money. And the game is got some really fucked ass shit in it where you're in like A pose for half the cinematics. And
Oh, I think I've actually seen some footage of that game in the most recent XXE, because I do remember a lot of T posing. Or whatever it is.
that's not
Is that
no,
not?
maybe I did release. Yeah, maybe I did already release it. I forget when I even last released it.
I just remember a lot of lollies spinning.
Yeah, that may be it.
I just didn't recognize it from like the other MMOs that you had demonstrated before in XXEs, so I assumed it was a new one.
It's quite possible I did release that already. That it was a while ago I recorded that, so that's quite possible. So yeah, the game had a peak of like maybe 600 users, so it was a pretty heavy bomb. It's very, very rare to see games actually flop on Steam, although it's hard to really call it a flop because they definitely made money off of it. It's
well, yeah, that's the issue.
It's very safe. Is the thing is even a game does negatively, like take Monster Hunter World for example. There's a very disastrous release for that game. No ability to turn off Blur. The mouse acceleration was completely berserk. Online multiplayer just didn't function at all for 90% of users. The actual game itself really isn't good, and it was just an absolute disaster. And it was, I think, one of the fastest selling games on Steam, or at least one of the fastest PC games on Steam from Japan. So Sega or whoever really dropped the ball on it, and it was still insanely successful. It just really goes to show you that there's really a lot of market security and stuff like Steam. If you, for example, had released something that broken on your independent launcher, you would have had a double barrier of, first of all, getting people into it and exposing them to it, and then having them keep coming back to it. Whereas Steam, being a central publisher, really alleviates a lot of that mental overhead. It's a really complicated thing, but is basically saying you can just release absolute garbage on Steam and make money off of it constantly. There's actually a lot of very illegal games that have been pushed on the Steam that use gacha assets from like Lords of the Locker Room and stuff that most certainly don't have rights to use any of the samples or video data, but they show up on Steam and get sold.
Yeah, that's crazy to me. The amount of copying in the industry, especially on this like tier 3 area of indie sort of developers and stuff like that. And in the East, it seems like copyrights are never respected, right? Because you get all those
Yeah.
crazy things like the Shrek and Donkey version of League of Legends that I saw some footage of.
Well, I mean, even look way back to like what was it, Contra and Geiger? Contra just like using
Right.
facehuggers and shit.
Yeah. Yeah, that's pretty
But
insane.
that's because the Japanese, they see it like they see derivative works a lot differently than America does. Like for example, this one phone game I'm playing, Azur Lane, it's just like a ridiculous amount of references to anime and shit. And there's like a lot of more subtle references to manga and even some American stuff in there. And there's a lot of collaboration events in these. So, for example, I don't know if we're going to get it here in America because of localization. Licenses are actually a huge fucking train wreck, and a lot of stuff never gets pushed to the US or Canada. But there was a Neptunia collaboration, so it was like a bunch of characters from the Neptunia series in there. Puzzle and Dragons had stuff from Dragon Ball Z, and uh, what's it called? I don't remember a lot of these, but there's a lot of like old anime and stuff I can't remember the name of. Uh, I'm expecting to see like a JoJo collaboration at some stage. I'm really surprised I haven't seen yet. But say for example, Evangelion. You know, these collaborations show up where they get licensed to put these characters and names and assets and stuff into their games. There's a lot of stuff like that, and you also can even see that in Monster Hunter World. I think there's like a Mega Man collaboration or something going on. So the Japanese culture is really, 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 really bizarre and super alien to look at as a Canadian. I was watching some videos a while back of just like I'm sure I mentioned this again of walkthroughs of Japan and just how peaceful it is in the middle of the city like Tokyo. There's like no traffic at all. There's a fuck ton of people on the streets at like 9 p.m. Here, you wouldn't ever be outside after dark, especially alone. It isn't. This is the highest crime area in all of Canada. You will get attacked. You will get mugged. And even in like broad daylight, you have extremely few people out on foot. Not because it's like a big place, but because it's unsafe and there's far more traffic. And the traffic is absolutely fucking insane. And guarantee you, our population, despite the very, very large number of immigrants, is nowhere near comparable to anything in Japan because Japan is very small, very tightly packed. It's a very different kind of place, and the health of people as well in Japan. You know, over here, if it isn't an East Indian, it's an old baby boomer white Bible bumper. You know, so the East Indians are usually in pretty good health, but very, very few of the white people are in good health. You watch these Japan videos, they're not doctored or anything. It's literally just like an hour of a guy walking around, no commentary. There is almost nobody who is in bad health. There was like one old person with a cane. There was plenty of elderly people, but they were all in good health. And there was like almost not even a single overweight person at all. And I distinctly remember the last time I went to the bank, I got to see my own SJW, a ham planet, pink hair, 800 pounds, the whole fucking works. I felt legitimately threatened by this behemoth. I could have been eaten. I was fucking terrified. These things are real. You think it's just a meme? They're fucking
No.
real, man.
Yeah, they are. Especially, listen, in America, I see a bunch of. I see a lot of stuff in America that probably I should be more sensitive to than I am. And I think that one of them is definitely the obesity issue here. Like, I started trying to improve my health about a year and a half ago. And regardless of like what you can say about the modern trends where everybody's like trying to get in on all of these these it turns into a sort of like its own level of marketing silliness where people find studies that say you should be eating this, not that, or whatever, and then they sort of just gravitate to whatever they already think of in their preconceived notions of like what is healthy or what is moral, even because you get into the whole vegan argument. And even outside of stuff like that, that's really, really silly. If you want to try to improve your health, you're already, like, apparently in America, a step above the average, a step ahead of the average, where you're you're basically like in a position where the entire spectrum of food that you can eat here, you find out through research that it's just fucked. It's like everything has this like weird hydrogenated oil in it. Everything has sugar in it. Everything like gluten just destroys your bowels, even if you're not diabetic or gluten insensitive or whatever. Um, it's just insane, and you have a strong connection with whatever you're eating. Like I guess it affects your gut biome. Like there's all sorts of stuff you can find. You just Google or search a lot of this stuff, and in the East, and even in like Italy and stuff like that, like in Europe, these people are famous for eating nothing but fucking carbs, like nothing but bread and pasta and pizza,
Glass.
and they're usually a lot healthier than America. So even though we eat a lot of the same stuff, so it must not actually be the same stuff. Is like the conclusion that you could draw pretty easily, or it must be some other element of our diet. But really, it's not really the same thing.
Well, I know in Europe, Americans are most infamous for their pink slime.
Yeah, exactly. The slime. I think I did have a friend. He was actually the original Todd, the OG Todd, and he worked at McDonald's and apparently manufactured some of the chicken there. And I say manufactured that is a very deliberate word choice because the process that he described to me that unfortunately I can't recall in complete detail is very spooky. So
It's really kind of insane. Like my health is really terrible. A good chunk of it's also outside of my control, but it's like I'm probably like the least social, least mobile person you're ever gonna meet, and I don't hold a candle to the average person in terms of weight and other issues. And I just can't like even fathom what they're doing to get so fucking obese. They're spending a lot of money for one, because this food's not fucking cheap. If you wanted to eat a pizza every day, you're spending like, $15 every day just for a fucking pizza. Who the fuck can afford that?
Tony.
Like maybe they're just leeching off their parents' credit card or something, but like the particularly large people, to feed a diet like that is not an easy feat. Financially, it's kind of ridiculous. It kind of brings me back to like the phone games and shit. It's like, how are people dumb enough to spend 200, 300, 400, 500, 600 thousands of dollars on a fucking cell phone, still smart enough to hold a job or keep hiding the expenses from their parents? Like you really scratch your head wondering what's going on. Maybe they just suck a lot of dick.
It reminds me of we had some podcast that I had re-listened to a while ago, and you were describing the business practices of the average games journalist, and you were saying literally sucking dick. That made me laugh.
Yeah,
That's a good one.
yeah, that's what they do. They're shills. They're extensions of marketing staff. They literally just suck dick. That's what they do.
It's pretty.
All these
insane.
websites, IGN, game trailers, Rock RPS, etc. They're shells. They, whether or not they're on a contract doesn't really matter. Usually paid under the table, says, "Hey, here's a article from our marketing team. Publish this." And so they publish it. Or they're said, "Hey, show like just these specific parts of a game, and don't talk about this. Only talk about that, etc."
Yeah. Any
Publish this and
guidelines
pay
or
you.
what I found out actually was apparently the average like the standard business practice for when you're doing any reviewing is they send you like an entire legal document that's legally binding of like some sort of obscure abstract NDA that you have to enter into. And so this non-disclosure agreement tells you that you can't talk about like X, Y, and Z in your review or whatever. Like
Yeah.
there's like certain things that you're prohibited from speaking about in your review, or you can like if you talk about it, they give you guidelines for how to approach the subject. It's like, in what world is this real? Like, in what world is that journalism to begin with? Like, imagine you take the same circumstances, but you add the context of like a political environment or a crime scene investigator or some journalist in a different kind of space, and imagine that like actually, I would think you'd be more likely that the government would send you some shit like that. Like, hey, don't talk about this. Hey, there's a gag order on that. Like, I've heard of
Yeah.
stuff like that before. But the idea that it's happening in private businesses, like, that's some shit, man. Like, I actually was ranting about this some time ago because I played the Prey 2017 game a month ago. And that game has so many issues. I played on the version 1.0, even though obviously it's been updated since. And I'm glad I did because I exposed the shit out of this game for being a complete disaster on launch. And you see this, there's actually a problem that I thankfully didn't run into. The game will just delete your saves or corrupt your save file.
There was a lot of allegations that Monster Hunter World would actually do the same thing on
Yeah.
the last boss of the game, that it actually corrupt your data.
Yeah, and so I think that the fact that that simultaneously exists, and the also on top of it. So yes, that exists. That is a bug that exists in that game in Prey 2017. But you know how people found out about it was people reviewing the game on YouTube, like just amateur like vloggers or whatever. It wasn't through games journalists. It wasn't through these marketing firms, right?
Well, you saw God of War Ascension, didn't you?
Unfortunately.
Those bugs, there's a 100% reproducible bugs in multiple areas of the game that prohibited you from continuing without restarting. And I found them on my very first playthrough. And then all the bugs in Darksiders 2, over a year after release. Space Marine, Kingdom Hearts, etc. All this shit I find that it's just like the common thing. Anybody's gonna fucking experience this stuff. Anybody. And of course, nobody talks about it. Nobody says anything because they just read the shell websites that always stay far away from technical elements, especially because their writers don't know anything about them, and because they would probably get sued if they did talk about them.
Yeah, it's just a disaster. The fact that you have this bug on launch. If I recommended this game and it still had this problem, if I even at the end of my review, I was like, yeah, definitely go buy this game and show your support for this developer because they make some good products, right? Like hypothetically speaking, because I would never say those words about anything, obviously. If you just look at the idea that you have that kind of game breaking bug, if I didn't disclose that information, I would feel very liable. I would feel very responsible if somebody actually went out and spent money on it and then had that problem. And I, I don't know, man. I would be very remiss if I did not include information like that. And I don't even consider myself a journalist. I consider myself some fucking idiot on YouTube, right? And so
I'm just a color commentator, and I just find all this crap, and it's like, why isn't this being exposed? Why is this still being sold?
Yeah, well, I did have an illuminating experience not so long ago where I was watching this video of somebody who was playing Halo 3 on an emulator, and he would only ever say anything negative about the experience he was having when it literally slowed to 1 FPS. Anything else, any massive fucking flashing of particle effects like not being rendered properly, any issues with sound, he would just be like, well, I'm having a lot of fun here. I actually felt like I was watching a Jay Barrino video.
In many cases, I think people are just like so brainwashed and so, casual is not really like a good word because I know many casuals who point out all this stuff to me all the time, but just not really aware of what's going on around them. And I think Jay Barrino especially fits into that, and he just doesn't pay attention to anything at all. Judging by what you guys have described of his gameplay, that definitely is the case. But it's something like where you actually will point it out to him, then he'll probably notice it. And these things, once you see them, you can't unsee them. Like once you actually know what you're looking at and you identify it, your brain's always going to see it.
Yeah.
It's like there was a good example, but I can't really remember it. But there's because normally your brain tries to filter things out, especially things you don't immediately really understand. So there's a lot of things people will physically register but not mentally register, or if they do, it's only very momentary. And especially while doing casting, a lot of people are not very good at casting and playing at the same time, which adds more overhead. So that's actually one of the reasons why I tend to miss a lot of things in my videos. Even though I can catch a lot of things, I still miss quite a bit. And this is where the verification process will come in. I'll probably notice 4 or 5 times the amount of stuff I pointed out in the video in something like Doom 2016. But there's a lot of things right now, especially since I played Space Marine and verified Sonic 2006, my eyes are trained now. I can actually see per frame fuck all the time and everything. Every time there's a transition where there's a frame off on the lighting and stuff, I can spot it every single fucking time. So like DMC, HKS was streaming it to me. I literally could see every single fucking transition in that game was broken.
Yeah.
But most people are not going to pay attention to that. They're not trained to really pay attention to things like that. But it's also because I have a developer background as well. I'm used to assessing things and, looking at things and being like, hey, this looks off. There's probably a reason why it's off. And then investigate it. So most of these casters who don't have developer backgrounds, I don't think they should be doing reviews at all. I don't think that they should be assessing games at all. I think they have no business getting into it unless they are at least willing to actually understand what's going on, because I think that's a very, very critical part, is actually understanding what makes a game, because it's not nearly as complicated as what people think it is. And 99% of the things that are broken is almost always going to be as a result of maliciousness or laziness or both. And that's why I started trying to educate things along the way, because I would get a lot of questions like, why does this happen, and so on and so forth. And that's where you would end it with my runs like Darksiders 2, where I actually end up spending like half the game trying to get into things and trying to break things, oftentimes succeeding and sometimes not succeeding. And demonstrative is always better than just like explaining straight up. And once you get into that mindset of actually just paying attention, looking past the beaten path, looking past where the developer wants you to look, and you just will see so much shit that's fucked. When I walked into Heavenly Sword, that was quite a while ago, and I really wasn't doing the kind of exhaustive analysis on technical stuff that I was doing in say for example Sonic 2006. And all it really took was me realizing that there's these invisible walls that ragdolls don't want to go past, and then trying to force them into it. And I fucking snapped that game right in half. I literally teleported myself across the game world by just sticking physics objects and bodies into a hallway and rolling through them. And it's just one of the most asinine basic things you're going to do, because every fucking 3D game has physics. Everybody fucks around with physics. So you stuff things into a hole next to these invisible doors, and suddenly you discover an absolutely colossal bug in the game engine. But nobody really even plays around in shit. I can't watch most people play games because it's so infuriatingly railed. It's like just watching one of those games review videos where they just show a reel that the publisher handed them to show with, just the high points and no actual game content. Because, I mean, even if I look at the average Steam video, their trailers, I will see everything is fucked. A lot of their screenshots are fucked up. You notice on Steam, a lot of games don't actually show their user interface. And it's not just because they're trying to make it edgy and dynamic and cinematic. It's because a lot of the games actually have really, really bad user interfaces, and they don't want to show them.
I just don't understand the... Excuse me. Sorry. I think... I think there's something to be said for the amount of crazy people that exist in this world that are willing to completely ignore shit that's right in front of their face. Yes, I understand the idea that maybe they're not technically minded, like you were saying earlier, where you have people who just aren't observant. They register it, they don't actively register it mentally, like you were describing earlier. But I still think that stuff I've been playing Dead Space lately. This is the game that I'm playing the most of lately, and I'm almost done with the game. And the production will be live soon. The issue with it, one of the earliest issues that I saw, is that objects that you have not interacted with, that are just sitting in the environment, will just start levitating sometimes, because their physics engine is completely fucked. And depending on the frame rate you're running in the game, objects can either levitate a little bit, just sit there still, like you would expect them to until you interact with them, or they can dance wildly, corpses in body bags will just start fucking spinning. All you have to do is stomp on them while they're also inside another object, and they just fuse together in this archon of insanity and start spinning around. And I think I have a video of it somewhere that I'll have to make sure that I cut up and add into the production at some point, because I wasn't able to capture it so far in this. But that's just the way it is. At this point, we are in a position where we're dealing with games that have these massive problems that I think anybody, even the people who aren't technically minded, should be able to observe and say, like, all right, this is fucked up, right? Like, all right, here's the other issue. First thing I see in this game, you're in an on rails cutscene that's supposed to introduce you to the epic narrative of this game, and the first thing that you see is that, like, this panoramic view of a space, like, not station, I guess it's like a cruiser of some kind, that is where the game is set on, and you're supposed to go into it, and from a distance there is I've the most insane display of Z fighting, where all of the panels are spazzing out inside each other, and they're like, "Take a look at her. That's the cruiser we're going towards." As it's fucking destroying itself. Like, this is launching the game once.
It's like the fucking tower in Space Marine. It's like the high point of the game. You're going to this tower to fight chaos. It's a sea of Z fighting, even when you're zoomed right into it.
Yes. Anytime you move the camera, there's like certain textures in that game that seem to warp and bend depending on if you're moving your camera or not. You don't even have to be moving your character.
Oh, maybe parallax mapping?
Yeah, I think it is, because it does not look right at all. It's like a chain link fucking texture of some kind that's supposed to be like a surface you're walking on or a part of a wall. And if the lighting is flickering or your camera is moving, then that texture is moving, and it looks very unnatural. Because it's supposed
parallax
to just be still.
Is one of those fucking things that is done really badly. I actually showed it in an XXE. In Final Fantasy XIV, in some update, they decided we're going to apply parallax maps to everything. So they use something like Mindtex or bitmap to material to generate these parallax maps, or they just went into their shader and plugged the diffuse into the parallax map, one of the two. Most of the textures in the game look absolutely fucked. And what happens with... See, parallax is supposed to fake depth. You have tessellation, which gives physical polys to something, and you have parallax. I'm not entirely sure how parallax works, but it has... there's a name for them, but they're like little cells, little billboards almost. And they're each displaying a portion of the texture. So at the right angle, usually a very steep vertical angle, it's going to look as though there's depth to it. You know, that's like the dream of the bump map, is to give things real depth. But parallax is not real depth. And when your camera starts becoming parallel, you are going to see those cells, and you're going to see a lot of warping. And Final Fantasy XIV actually has a very hard cutoff near the camera for this. So what you actually get is like this giant ripple of fractal distortion. I actually may have a really good screenshot here. Let me see if I can find it. And obviously this is now on everything. It's like on all the terrain, all the static meshes. The only thing it's not on is some of the characters. And it's fucked. It is seriously fucked. No matter where you look at it, it's fucked. So why aren't we using tessellation instead, which presumably won't have these issues? Because NVIDIA fucks up everything in part. And NVIDIA was like, hey, we're going to add in our own tessellation and make a big fuss about it and make everybody focus on that. And our tessellation will turn a flat box into 5 million polygons, which will perform like shit on basically every hardware except for our own, in a long line of NVIDIA doing brilliant things to try to make other cards look like they perform worse than theirs. And yeah, tessellation does exist today. I'm not entirely sure how performant it is. But the problem with tessellation is, since it's also based on textures, it tends to look really fucked up as well. I'm just seeing if I can find a good texture or not. I do have a texture of a guy in A pose.
That's a pretty good texture.
Yeah. I have textures of burly men and a... Well, I know it's in an XXE anyways. I'm sure you've seen what I'm talking about. But I also remember Lords of Game Testing, The Revenge, where basically portions of geometry looked as if they were sliding around.
Listen, I could not finish... I've beat the first game and couldn't finish its DLC. I just fucking spazzed out and started screaming. because I was trying to do a production of that, and then I just threw it all away when there was DLC. I couldn't handle it. I was not willing to do it.
I distinctly remember in the second game, the mystery of sliding textures everywhere. And that was actually badly configured parallax maps. It was just a flat parallax. Usually the parallax has like an intensity to determine how deep the cells are going to go. Of course, they're a flat texture, so when you hit the parallel point, they just kind of all merge into each other and turn into a gooey mess. Well, when it's flatly applied, what it's doing instead of shifting the cells based on a depth is it's shifting the whole texture around flatly. So that is why objects within that game were just looked as if the textures were just sliding around like you were having a fucking LSD episode or something like that, because that is actually what it was doing. I have
Games are
never
fucked.
seen a game where parallax map has looked any good. It's just one of those technologies. It's like we want to implement something, but we don't want to do it correctly. A lot like FXAA, for example. Let's blur the scene instead of addressing aliasing. And that, as a result, is one of the reasons why console games look really, really bad, because most of them have FXAA, and you certainly cannot turn it off.
Well,
I don't have a good screenshot on hand, but StarCraft 2 actually has parallax mapping as well.
really? Where?
Though they don't use it on too many things. The blood decals actually use it. At least one of them uses it. If you zoom into it and notice how really fucked up it looks, it's because you're seeing the cells on it. But StarCraft 2 is a fixed angular isometric camera, generally speaking. It can actually work for specific terrain objects in a game like that, because you're generally using just that camera. You're not getting really close up to them, but
Unless
anybody
you
who has like an
zoom.
eye, they'll see it, and it'll really pull them out.
What I like is people who, what do they do that silly shit for? There's like all of these StarCraft 2 custom campaigns that open up their maps with a really fucking close up shot of a fucking model that has its
Yes,
insane texture resolution, dude.
so many of these games have these fucking close-ups on these assets that are at best like skybox objects. I don't understand why.
Gotta count the pixels. That's like actually that happens in StarCraft 2 itself. So they're just taking after Blizzard. Well, you'll see that the ancient one, Zervan's fucking 32 by 32 bit mouth texture.
The whole zone and all the cinematics is such a fucking mess. I was gonna mention that one of the main uses I found for parallax mapping was actually a fake depth on skybox objects. For example, I had in one of my salvation scenes that never got used, but it was a concept that worked. Is I had like a grate, and then I had pipes behind it. So visually, you were looking at the grate, and when the camera moved, it looked as if there was pipes behind it that was fake depth. Well, that was actually a flat parallax distance. It was all one material, technically just a quad. There was no actual physical depth. But because of the camera being distant and the way the textures were masked together, you had the darker pipes behind the grate moving as the camera moved. So it appeared as if there was actually objects behind it, and it actually worked pretty seamlessly and pretty well at that distance. So there's cases where you can most certainly use that technology. It's just not as a general texture, especially in a freeform camera where you can get right into it, because it will always look really, really fucked up from 90% of angles.
Well, as Balethal in the chat mentions, there's always the example of Dark Templar, uncloaked, zoomed in on. They have plastic blades, and yet they also have zealots that have working blades. So why didn't they just copy paste that and recolor it?
So I did an animation for Antioch Chronicles 3, which was a kneeling animation for Zeratul.
Why did they use Zeratul's rig? What the fuck?
Because well, you had to use it, but I mean it's basically the same as normal Dark Templar. But
yeah, or is it his model that's fucked up, or I just know something about Zeratul's like the most fucked up model in the game.
Well, his model was in the sample assets, so it was possible for me to take that and not have to like redo the particles and stuff like that, because normally when you import them with Taylor Mouse's importer, it shreds a bunch of data. Well, these were in the sample assets that came with the quote unquote art, quote unquote tools. And I immediately, upon opening the match, noticed the spaghetti arms and other sort of like incredibly inhumane deformities that they had forced Zeratul through. There's a reason why he became gay. It's because, well, he was probably held by David Manning at shotgun point while they performed a stretching service on his arms and legs. The blade on his wrist blade, it's well, it's clipping through the back of it for one. The actual mount for it has an open face on the back of it, and one of the faces is just over there somewhere, and is weighted to the incorrect bone, if I recall as well. So I'm sure I have screenshots of that somewhere. It's just finding them is impossible on this fucking computer. But the absolute lunacy of fucking like not even just like the lunacy, just like the audacity of releasing something that just is just blatantly that fucked, where people were paid to make this. They were fucking paid to make this shit. And somebody okayed this. It wasn't just one guy who said, "Hey, I made a model, it's in a game and it's published now." There's channels you go through to get your stuff into the final product. Somebody okayed this crap and said this is release worthy. There was a team manager responsible for this individual who put this piece of shit in the game that okayed it. Obviously, without even looking at it, or at least having no shred of idea of what the fuck he was even looking at.
Yep. Well, I guess we gotta take a look at that animation you did when we play the TAC 3.
It was described to me as a very Blizzard animation.
Oh,
By an animator.
shit.
It was the first animation I had ever made for an organic unit.
Well, and they used it.
I think they used it. I've never played the whole thing. I couldn't.
Well, it's okay. You can watch me play it, and we'll just have some fun.
I will try. I wish the legalization of weed meant that I had enough money for weed, because I would most certainly need it to survive this experience. I have a feeling it's going to make me upset.
Probably. I guess I should drink
sure
enough
there's
beer
like
for
a
both
horror
of us.
in my mind where I think at one point I heard them discussing adding quick time events to the game. Like, as a defensive mechanism, I think I like shut it out and like turned off my brain and just like walked away. But there's still like that lingering memory where I think I actually did see that at one point, and that like
I can't wait.
Like, there's many unforgivable sins in this world, and that's one of them.
Quick time events in your SC2 micro campaign.
I just want to find people who think that quick time events are okay and just put them into a furnace.
Yeah.
The furnace doesn't even have to be on. They just can just stay there and just ferment, in the darkness, away from civilization.
Yeah, I think that's a better way to go than actually burning them, because then their fumes get into the air, and who knows what kind of global warming you're going to contribute to.
Yeah.
Well, I think that brings
people have to smell degenerate in the air, and we've got enough of that in the air over here.
Yeah, it was literally obfuscating visibility for like 2 weeks, from what I remember.
More like 2 months.
Destroyed.
We actually had compromised air quality all the way until last month, I think.
Yeah, it's insane.
And for a couple of weeks, I think we had like the worst air quality in the entire planet. It was fantastic. It was really like living in one of those post-apocalyptic worlds, except everything is going on as normal and nobody really seems to give a shit, even though this stuff is actually very dangerous to inhale.
Yeah, I can't believe nobody got sued for that or something. It's crazy.
Well, you can't really sue for it. There's nobody who's actually liable, except for the people who start the fires. The vast majority of those fires are actually man-made, but you have no way of knowing who made them. Big Brother is not that big.
Big
boy, Big Billy.
Well, I think that brings us to the end of the cast here. But thank you very much for joining me, and glad we were able to investigate Discord and Tencent. Oh yeah, that was the other thing that I wanted to talk about when we were talking about mobile games. To bring it all back to Tencent, is that they actually own like Clash of Clans and some insane amount of mobile properties.
They own a lot of shit. Like to get into Tencent is to get into a huge thing, because Tencent basically sees like online games that have potential and just immediately absorbs them if they can. There was a lot of like smaller MMOs. I think maybe even Mythos was one of them, related to Hellgate London and so on. I think those may have been sucked up by Tencent or some other Chinese company. I know Mythos was, because Mythos, I played both the original prototype version and then the Chinese funded one that came out after, and I believe there is some very PC recordings I have of that game, talking in a legitimate Chinese accent somewhere.
Oh, World of Warcraft.
So yeah, that'll be all for today. I mean, they're big subjects. There's a lot you can pull away from all of them. So
Yeah, I think that I think we had some valuable discussion, and then we also talked about StarCraft 2. So, mwah.
Baka Gaijin!